Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Heavy Metallurgy. It's Friday night, so it's time to relax. The week is over, and let's start the weekend by just hanging out and getting to talk about some classic heavy metal. If you don't recognize me, it's been a couple of weeks. I've been dealing with Hurricane Helene and the aftermath of that, but I am finally back online. And Marty is not. His band, The Glorious Dead, have a concert tonight. They're opening for Panopticon, if I remember correctly. So good luck. I'm sure it'll be a great show. Hope both bands have a lot of fun and hope there's a really good turnout for it. Just want to also say a quick shout out to Melanie from Melanie Loves Death Metal. Her family's had to relocate due to Hurricane Milton. That's the second one that's hit Florida here in the past 10 days or so. So, yeah, she has reported in. She's doing okay. The family is safe. They have not been able to go home yet. The area is still basically just shut down, too hazardous to let people back into those neighborhoods and communities yet. But we're glad she's okay. Best wishes to her and her family and everyone else who's affected by all this sucky weather that's been going on.
Unless
we will. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Aaron.
Unless you're a dick. If you're a dick, you might deserve it.
I'm not sure anybody deserves that kind of stuff, but yeah, maybe someone out there does. Regardless, we won't dwell on that tonight. We're here to do something much more fun, which is talk about heavy metal. And I've got two excellent guests who have agreed to come on and join us. Coming back for, we have lost track of how many times these guys have been on, but we've got Dan from the Corroseum website. Dan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Managed to get up in time, I think.
Yes, for those unaware, Dan is in Sweden. So, yes, he is a true metal warrior for getting up this late or early, whichever way you want to look at it.
Yeah, it's
to join
3 o'clock in the night or morning or evening or whatever you want to call it. No.
3 a.m. Dan time. So, yes, do appreciate you rearranging your schedule to join us. This topic we figured would be right up your alley. And to round out the show, we've also got, not having to get up at 3 in the morning to join, Aaron the Metal Theologian. Aaron, how are you doing?
Oh, man. It's been a long week and I've been listening to a ton of rap. So I had to brush up a little bit on this stuff, sort of get myself back up to speed. And even so, I'm not going to be able to hang with the two of you. So I'll just be hanging back, showing the obvious records, like the Heavy Load and shit, maybe goading you all into talking about it and telling some stories. Setting the expectations low here.
Yeah, Dan is obviously going to be our expert on this topic since we're talking about what's near and dear to his heart and homeland, which is Swedish heavy metal. Which, when I looked back through our list of previous episodes, I was kind of surprised we had never done a show about. We've touched on scenes in a lot of countries and a lot of regions, and we hadn't done Sweden yet. So I'm like, yeah, if Dan's available, we got to do that one. Before we dive in, I do want to make clear to everyone, there's already a lot of folks in the chat mentioning different bands and stuff, and that is great. Happy to see everybody. Sorry if I'm a little slow with the comments tonight. It has been a long week, and so, yeah, I'm trying to refuel with Red Bull here, but it's taken a little bit to kick in. I'll get comments up as fast as I can. But one thing just to be clear about tonight, obviously, Swedish has a very long and very varied heavy metal scene. We are by no means going to be able to cover every band that you all mention and throw up in the chat. Wish that we could, but yeah, that would take forever. We'd have to make it its own series. We're going to kind of touch on a lot of different eras, hit some highlights, some well-known bands and some well-loved bands, but also some more obscure stuff that folks may not know as much about. So apologies if we miss one of the bands that is near and dear to your individual heart. There's no way to cover all of it for a scene that's been around and has such a deep and rich history to it. But we'll try to do it justice for a couple of hours at least.
Yeah, I just want to highlight too, it's really kind of amazing, I think, that Sweden has as much going on as it does, because for anyone who hasn't paid any attention, there are 8 million people in Sweden, between 8 and 10 or something like that. So it's basically New York City, and that's the whole population, and they still manage to produce so many amazing bands. It's really, their own style of magic, right? Swedish magic is kind of its own thing right there. So that's one thing that just blows me away, is that a country like that is capable of producing so much great music,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was actually something I wanted to ask Dan about, kind of off the bat, is that for, by American standards, what we would think of as a relatively small country, Sweden does have, sort of like a high density of heavy metal bands. Is there anything culturally you think that really sort of helps prop up that scene and make it, have so many bands within it?
I think we had a lot of, musicians and bands per capita, overall. And there's a lot of classic reasons which people bring up about the Swedish music scene as a whole. We have this, at least when people are talking about like the Swedish pop phenomenon or whatever, they're talking about our public music schools. But there are also these we have these organizations where you can get like free rehearsal spaces. You can sort of, if you start a band, at least it used to be so in the 70s, 80s, 90s. I don't know about nowadays because everything goes to shit. But if you start a band in Sweden, you can register it as sort of like a study group, and you can get money for playing in a band.
Wow.
No, but you get a lot of support, and it's sort of structurally easier to be a musician in Sweden, I think, than maybe a couple of other countries. It's a supportive, or has been at least, used to be a supportive environment for music and culture. As for metal specifically, I don't know where it began, but I know that Swedish metal is very popular in Sweden. It's very what's the word for it? The Swedish word is folkligt. But you can run into like the most randomest guy at work, and he's like into Maiden, Judas Priest, and Manowar. And it is sort of normalized to having grown up with metal, at least from my generation. You meet people all the time who used to be into Maiden, Slayer, whatever. So it's I don't want to use the word mainstream, but it has a foundation of love for hard rock and metal music here in Sweden. It's not like a fringe subculture. It's more part of everyday music fandom, I think. And the way the Swedish metal scene sort of exploded we were sort of like early. I think if we're going to say that the UK, of course, that's where the real explosion of what we think of as traditional heavy metal happened. Hot on their heels, I would say, as far as being ahead of the time, I would say probably Sweden. Not saying it's like the second best metal country in the world, but I think we were pretty bloody early with it. So why, I'm not sure, but we were.
So it's not growing up watching Donald Duck on Christmas?
Yes, it's because we watched Donald Duck on Christmas that our metal scene is so good. Yes, Aaron.
That kind of makes sense.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah, and that kind of does lead into something else that's worth noting. You're absolutely right. The Swedish scene blew up relatively early in the 1980s, which I'm not sure a lot of people really appreciate that. If you ask a lot of just, especially younger metal fans, they think of the Swedish metal scene as being death metal, entombed, forward stuff, and then black metal, of course, as the 90s go on. If you say 80s Swedish metal, people, of course, are going to say one name in particular, Europe. But theirs was, a really deep scene, like you said, right around. I was kind of looking through my collection earlier, and it looks like around, especially like 1982, you started seeing like a lot of bands putting out, self-financed 7-inch singles or singles that were on small labels, kind of mimicking what was happening in the UK with the new wave of British heavy metal scene just a year or two earlier. Do you know, Dan, did a lot of those bands, were they basically kind of hearing that stuff and just developing their own scene following that sound, do you think? Or because some of those bands did go back further, like Heavy Load and stuff, those bands trace their roots back to the 70s. Were they following the Swedish bands forward, or did the UK have a big impact on the early Swedish scene?
I think for Heavy Load specifically, they were sort of like an aberration. They were way ahead of their time. If you listen to like the first Heavy Load album from '78, it is.
Yeah.
It's proto metal. That's not even proto. It's just metal from '78. But yeah, I think one reason there was. I would also say that 1982 was the. If 1980 was sort of like the New Wave HML scene really exploded, 1982 in Sweden definitely, and I think there was. I wouldn't say easy, but probably compared to some other countries, relatively easy to release your own 7-inch of any genre in Sweden back in the day, because there was sort of like a network for it and an industry. I mean, Sweden has always been like, or always, not nowadays, of course, but a country where people bought a lot of records. We're a record-loving nation. But I think the relative ease of releasing your own product had a lot to do with it, and it's meant a lot for. I mean, I'm talking to friends who are like punk collectors, and I mean even way more primitive stuff than even the most primitive metal we can bring up tonight. Actually got released on a 7-inch in like fucking 78 or 79. So it's no great mystery that we have a lot of really great metal from the early 80s in Sweden. There was an infrastructure around here at the time which allowed for that.
Oh, okay. Makes sense. Yeah, and some folks in the chat tonight have already mentioned that. Yeah, they know like maybe the Swedish punk scene a little better than the Swedish metal scene. I'm the other way around, but yeah, you're right. Both scenes did exist for sure. One other question along those kind of lines. While there was this very diverse scene with a lot of bands in the early 80s, it doesn't seem to get the same kind of attention as the new wave of British heavy metal scene, or even maybe like, the early German scene once Noise Records starts up, or the early American scene. Why did the Swedish scene kind of get overlooked in, later years? For those who don't know, DaN really did a lot to kind of help raise the visibility of these bands. Over at the Corroseum a long time ago, he posted a article that's well known to a lot of folks. It was called 707 Inches of Swedish Steel. And, it was kind of, the first guide walkthrough to a lot of those early singles that most people outside of Sweden never had a chance to encounter. But yeah, for folks that haven't drilled into it at that level, again, the Swedish scene's maybe a little less known. Is there a reason that it just doesn't get the same amount of attention today from fans and collectors? Or is it just bad luck?
I don't know. There was quite a lot of it. I think that maybe I'm sort of biased because I'm most of my Swedish friends here or collect, friends who like diehard into metal and metal collectors. There's basically no one who didn't at some point sort of collect and were into old classic Swedish metal. So I mean, I would say that old Swedish metal is sort of like a niche collector or underground genre, but maybe it hasn't spread as much to the US. Maybe, I mean, because you have your US metal, and apart from that, maybe more collectors are aware of like the new wave heavy metal. And I know for a fact, as once again being like a fanzine professor and have read through a lot of fanzines from back in the day, the Swedish bands were really shit at promoting themselves outside of Sweden or even outside of their hometown. So it's very rarely that if you look like an old fanzine from the early mid 80s, it's very rarely that you see a review of some Swedish demo or Swedish 7-inch or anything there. I think we were sort of like the possibilities were there. A lot of stuff was released, but we don't really had a tradition of promoting yourself. Yeah, it's like the bands were really happy. Oh, we got to release a 7-inch and got city sponsorship with a couple of $100 to do it, and they were happy with that. And this just to get local gigs, but sending it out to magazines or bigger labels or spreading out in sort of the spurring fanzine scene, the underground scene. I think it was sort of a low awareness of the global metal underground from the beginning, and that sort of made them, even to this day, a bit more obscure. But I mean, I would say people who are even slightly into the old underground metal scene, so like first half of the 80s, should be quite aware of the first wave of Swedish heavy metal. It's not. I've internationally met way more Swedish metal collectors than German metal collectors. So yeah.
I have a theory about that though.
Yeah, what is your take on this, Aaron? I want to get you back in here too.
How many Swedish labels are there that were doing metal? The only one I can think of off the top of my head is Fingerprint.
Yeah. That
was like a metal label. So you probably had more private pressings, whereas in Germany, most of the shit was going through Noise or Steamhammer or someone like that. So if there was a label involved, even if it was an indie, it was probably a lot easier for them to do a license deal with a Metal Blade or Combat, which gave German bands an entry point into the US that the Swedish bands doing their private pressings didn't necessarily have.
That's a very good point. Yeah, I also forgot to add that. We never had any real... We had a few. You mentioned Fingerprint, maybe also the label called Sword and Tandan.
Yeah.
But there was not like a real local, like really dedicated metal labels. Like if you look at countries like Holland or Belgium or indeed Germany, of course. But that's something that sort of started out in the early 80s, but sort of bloomed in the mid 80s. And the mid 80s in Sweden was, we had like a neutron bomb who just destroyed everything. And we already mentioned the name on this neutron bomb, and I don't want to mention it again. I think you know what I'm talking about. No, one band actually, I mean, yeah, their two first albums is it's great melodic metal, but when I don't think there's any other scene, at least in Europe, where the popularity and mainstream appeal of one band made the whole local scene so weird, because everyone stared in that direction, and we lost out on. We basically had no mid 80s speed power thrash scene at all in Sweden. We were totally nuked by this band. So that made the Swedish scene really weird, unfortunately.
Well, let me ask you this then, because there's another little sort of mystery that I've had going on in my head. You've heard me talk about this before, but in the 70s, as an American, I almost feel weird like comparing Norway and Sweden, because it seems like just an obvious thing to do. But if you look at the 70s, Norway kicked Sweden's ass. There are barely any bands coming out of Sweden, and Norway is the shit with bands like Flax, and there's just a ton of great stuff. But then all of a sudden in the 80s, it flipped, and there was nothing coming out of Norway. I mean, TNT. And Sweden was just like gold. Everything just fucking was at least worth a listen. Most of it ruled, So do you have any hypothesis as to how that might have happened? Was there something similar with...
No, I mean, I think we had a great 70s scene. I mean, I am not into 70s rock, bar a few exceptions like Black Sabbath and fucking Flower Traveling Band or whatever. But I can still recognize that we really had a great, talented 70s scene. I mean, a band like November is a classic one that people...
Yeah, November is really good.
Yeah, and there's lots of like cool cult classics like Solid Ground, Rhapsody, White. There's too many. I'm not like totally...
Sama was from Sweden.
Yeah. There's a very, very well respected prog and psychedelic scene as well in Sweden. I don't like heavy rock. There were a few. I think November is the best one and the most well-known one. But Sweden was more like a prog scene, I think. But
maybe
heavy metal, hard rock, I think it exploded in the early 80s, really. And it was, because our punk scene was fucking vibrant. It was pretty huge and a big thing. And I sort of riding on the coattails of that, we also had this first wave of Swedish heavy metal scene, but it didn't really explode until the early 80s.
Okay. Yeah. A couple of things that have crossed my mind thinking about this. One thing that makes the Swedish scene stand out compared to the German scene and at least several of the other European country scenes, a lot of Swedish bands chose to sing in Swedish. Some did English, but some did native language, and that does set up a little bit of a barrier to folks who aren't familiar with the language. You can hear the music and hear it's good, but it becomes very hard to sing along when you don't know the language and such, or have any idea what they're singing about. Was there a particular reason that was more common among Swedish bands than say, like, I can't think of any German. I mean, I know there were some, but none of the bigger German bands, or even some of the smaller ones, you don't come across a lot of German bands that sang in German or stuff. You have to get to maybe France or Spain before you start finding a lot of bands singing in non-English.
Yeah, even in Italy, they sang in English.
Yep, that's a good point, Aaron. Good example.
For better or worse.
Exactly.
It shows, but they did stick to English, even though it was a little rough around the edges at times.
I don't think there were. I mean, in the very early 80s, and some really underground local youth cafe bands, there were quite a lot of sort of cellar bands that sang in Swedish. Once we got up until 82, 83 and onward, where these real heavy metal bands started releasing singles, there's a handful. Yeah, I think there's still only 10% of all these classic singles were actually sung in Swedish, but that's a lot, I guess, singing in native language. And I think it's because it relates to a tradition from the 70s where singing in English was looked upon as being mainstream and sell out. It was part prog, part punk idealisms that led to singing in Swedish was sort of like the homely, the more honest way to do it. But it's not that many singles, I think, that or a band that's sung in Swedish. Once you got to the actual album stage, there are barely any. But there are a couple of things. Even some of the absolute trailblazing, heaviest bloody proto power metal stuff from 82 is sung in Swedish. There's a few classics. And I want to ask you guys, what do you think? I don't know if you're familiar with two examples like Onyx and Nattsvart. Would they have been better if they sung in English than in Swedish?
Aaron, do you want to take that first?
I don't know either of those bands. So I know Onyx by reputation, right? The 45, right? But no, I haven't heard either of them.
Okay. Yeah, but I think as far as I've heard from people who have this sort of classic Swedish metal singles where it's sung in Swedish, people sort of appreciate it being a bit more exotic. But I'm used to basically, 99% of all metal I have is sung in a second language because English is a second language for me, so it's hard to compare it. But
yeah, it's hard to say. I'm used to hearing the Onyx and Nattsvart in Swedish, so if I heard it in English, my knee-jerk reaction would probably be that's not better at this point.
No, it wouldn't be.
Would it have helped the bands at the time? Maybe, but it's interesting what you've said earlier too about a lot of these bands weren't really going for a wide geographic exposure. That a lot of them were very content to kind of work on a very local or regional scale, and that makes a lot of sense. Then why wouldn't you sing in Swedish if you're mainly going to be playing in Swedish towns and clubs to a strictly Swedish audience? There would have been no downside really to it.
I think there's an expectation game though too, because one thing I remember from when I was in Germany in the 80s is of course I had friends there who were starting bands just like here, but there was sort of an expectation that if you were at all serious, you were going to be singing in English. It was just sort of taken for granted. And I wouldn't be surprised if Sweden had some of that going on too, just because of the whole the international language. Everyone speaks English, so
yeah, could be.
And English kind of is what Esperanto wanted to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, interesting insights into the Swedish scene. So appreciate your thoughts on all of that, Dan. Because it's in the US, sometimes it seems like a relatively exotic scene from the early '80s, but those points definitely shed some light on it. Things make a little more sense there. So appreciate that. Before it gets buried any deeper, I wanted to say thank you to North of the Rockies for the super chat. Really appreciate that. Hope you're doing well. And gentlemen, any other things you wanted to discuss in general before we start showing some different records from all these different Swedish metal scenes?
The only other thing that I've noticed about the language thing is that the poorer the country, the more likely the band is to be singing in their native language. Mexican bands tend to sing in Spanish.
True.
Brazilian bands tend to sing in Portuguese.
Mm-hmm.
American bands sing in English.
Yeah, or culturally isolated, I guess. And Sweden was sort of culturally isolated in a way in the 70s and early 80s, at least, for various reasons. But yeah.
Yeah,
maybe.
French bands often sing in French, but I think that's just a French thing, and we understand that. That's cool.
Yeah. Because they hate the British.
They're going to do it their way, and that's all right. All right. Well, let's let's.
It's perfect correlation, but I just think it's an indicator,
Mm-hmm. Anyway. No, that's interesting. I had not thought about that beforehand. But yeah, let's start showing folks some records here. We've had a good intro conversation, but Dan, what is the first record you would like to highlight this evening?
Yeah, that has been my question all week. I was like, where should I begin? My God. I had like 3 or 4 starting points, and I eventually settled on... we have to start with a really classic, early, traditional Swedish heavy metal band. And I talked about them before. I mean, it's so obvious, it's ridiculous, but of course we have to talk about Gotham City.
Right on.
Yes.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. The band who sounds, or at least early days, sound like they sing in Swedish, but actually don't. Because of the early vocals of, oh my God, what's his name again?
Ola Olsson.
Ola Olsson. But these are not the official first album of the evening. I'm going to shed some light and some love of the official reissue of the 7-inch and the 1982 demo, which Cult Metal Classics recently put out. I know you, Alan, picked out the Gotham City single on a previous stream. Mm-hmm. This is like such a prime Swedish heavy metal recording from 1982. It's one of my favorite Swedish metal songs. The title track of Gotham City is like, I mean, it is one of those perfect heavy metal anthems to me. And I mean, it's sort of very homely recorded. The vocals are sort of like semi-infamous, but absolutely not in a bad way or difficult to listen to. It's his voice is sort of it's not the most musical, but it fits the music perfectly. The riffings are amazing, the harmonies, the epic ending of this song. Mm-hmm. People had been waiting for Gotham City reissues for decades. To me, I mean, that the fact that Gotham City finally got reissued, both the 7-inch and the 2 albums, it felt like we're the last band in the world to actually finally reissue, or the last band in Sweden anyway. I think
they were way overdue. Yes.
Yeah. It might have something to do with the fact that someone bootlegged this stuff like 6 months before a Cult Metal Classic releases. So finally, the band got their shit together and agreed to reissue. And the reason I picked up this one specifically is because it featured the debut demo. It used to be known as the 1981 demo, but it was actually not recorded in 81. That's hype. It was recorded in 82. So this has a couple of tracks from the Black Ritz, early recordings of some Black Ritz stuff. It has a couple of unreleased stuff. I think it's like 3 unique songs on this one. I would say the track Midnight Hunter is like a really cool proto speed metal track from early 1982. And I mean, what's to say about Gotham City that hasn't been said before? It is, for me, the best early 80s traditional Swedish heavy metal band. It's amazing riffing, great songwriting, one of Europe's greatest metal band ever. So, yeah, Gotham City. What else could we start with?
Nope, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, it's really, and it's funny because it's one of those bands that went underappreciated for a long time, but just as more and more people heard it, they came to understand just how good that band could be. Excellent place to start, absolutely. All right, Aaron, what would you like to start with?
All right, well, here's the obvious place for me to start, and this band has already kind of taken a little bit of incoming, but I absolutely love this record, this first Europe record. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, it took me years. I heard this record was like great. I saw Martin Popoff giving it a 10 out of 10 in his book, and I had heard all sorts of great things. And because of that song, well, and the other song, Carrie, which wasn't as big over here, but is probably even worse. Because of that, I just was like, no, I'm just not open. I mean, I'd see the logo and go, no, just not going to happen, right? This record is so good. It has like that sort of Swedish magic that I talk about. I was trying to think about what that means, actually, like what actually, if I were to try and describe Swedish magic. And I think a sense of melody is part of it, a certain sort of grandiosity without necessarily being super over the top, though, without necessarily being Man-O-War, that sort of thing, but just sort of a little bit kind of epic in terms of how the songs are written and that sort of thing. And this has it all. It really does. I mean, every song on this record I think is great. So, yeah, if you've been hearing that this is great and like staying away from it because of we all know, you're hurting yourself. This really is a gem of a record, and it's an easy one to overlook for obvious reasons. It's even easier to be prejudiced against it. And I was, but man, I love that record so much.
Yeah, I mean, if both Aaron and Jurgen are telling you the record is good, it's time to investigate it. That's enough said. Yeah. They didn't start out where they ended up. And yeah, as Dan pointed out before, it wasn't the only scene that had that kind of happen where a band got very popular with a radio-friendly song. Some people have really pointed at the new wave of British heavy metal suffering the same fate after Pyromania became such a huge thing, that there was a lot of pressure on all those bands to start cleaning up their sound. Why can't you make an album like Pyromania for our label? It's like, well, we're not Joe Elliott, but a lot of those bands kind of got steered in that kind of direction to follow the Def Leppard success train. So it happened to others too. Sad but true.
No, I would never pour any hate on the first or even the second Europe album. Haven't listened to them in ages, but I know it to be absolutely quality, like early melodic, almost like semi neoclassical in some sense, but really great melodic metal.
See, I still haven't even ventured out into the second record. People have been telling me the second one's good too, but I've been like, it's getting a little close.
It is, but those two are still listenable. Yeah, it's more like the phenomenon of how other bands wanted to be them, and nuclear bombs are cool. It's just that what happens after it's a disaster.
Well, here's the other thing that I'm wondering, because when Alan mentioned Pyromania, we're going back into the philosophy of it. We haven't even showed 3 records yet, but
it's okay.
See, by the time Pyromania came out, I definitely think that was a nuclear bomb the way Alan described it, but I also feel like you could make a case that the new wave of British heavy metal had kind of run its course by that point. There were still some great records coming out in 83 and 84 and even beyond with that sort of sound. But as far as like that stuff being this fresh new thing that, was just kind of taking at least the country, if not the world, by storm, that was kind of over by the time Pyromania broke. And that has me almost wondering if there was something similar that happened in Sweden by the time the Final Countdown broke. I don't know. I can't make that case one way or the other because I just don't have enough information.
No, because I mean, I still blame the Final Countdown for the fact that our development of real heavy metal got totally stumped. A lot of bands who might have been kept developing and being like these really killer heavy power speed bands, everyone wanted to be the new Europe. So I see your point on the UK scene. In Sweden, it was a disaster.
All right, because from the outside, it kind of looks like Swedish stuff died, but then they sort of regrouped and came out with the death metal.
Yeah, that's
you know, because Sweden was on the cutting edge against what's that happened, right?
The revenge.
Yeah,
Yep.
the revenge. So, all right, well, cool. I'm glad I asked the question because that's interesting.
Yep, no, it's a good point. All right, I'm going to start with kind of an obscure band. This might have been one that Dan was referring to a little bit earlier. They never made it past the demo stage, but they made one hell of a demo that thankfully did get the anthology treatment a number of years ago. The band is called, I'm going to say Jonah Quizz. Dan, am I butchering it with American?
Nope.
Okay.
Jonah Quizz.
Jonah Quizz. The band sings in Swedish, but yeah, the first they had a couple of demos. The one that I'm most familiar with that I heard first, even before this came out, was done in 1982, and it is brilliant early 80s, European metal. It's fast, it's very tight. They had a very talented vocalist who people will know, named Johan Landquist. This was his band before he joined Candlemass, for their Epicus Doomicus release. So yeah, great vocalist, amazingly good songs, especially the stuff from the 1982 demo. As Dan mentioned before, 1982 seems to be like when you had like a lot of really fantastic stuff start coming out of Sweden, and this was one of those bands. But yeah, they just never had any kind of full official release later on. But Stormspell Records picked this up for release, I believe, in 2009, and there's the trusty Corroseum logo right next to it. You already made sure to put that on there for sure. But yeah, if you want to hear just how good some of these very early Swedish bands were, this is an excellent demo to dial up on YouTube sometime this weekend or when you're watching it. I really am pushed to think of anything that was better than this coming out of the early years of Sweden. But that might just be my opinion. What do y'all think of this one? Dan, I know you're familiar with it. Aaron, I think you know this one too, but I might be wrong.
You know something? I got the I think it was No Remorse who put that on record. But it
could have
really
been. I don't know on vinyl.
So I'm actually making a note to check it out.
The first CD was Stormspell, which I helped Jordan with sorting this out. So I went to guy's place and we got the tapes to get remastered and everything, and I helped them out with releasing that original CD. And yeah, it's an amazing that 82 demo is so cool, and it's so well produced. It's tight.
Yes.
And, I mean, it's like, it doesn't sound the least bit underground, and it's total high class, well written early heavy metal, sung in Swedish, but it's like it's so cool. There was it's been a vinyl reissue as well on the Cult Metal Classics, which might still be available. I know the original CD on Stormspell is getting really expensive now. This one should still be amazing. No, sorry, it should still be available. One thing about this version is that they put the 1980 demo first. And 1980 demo is still cool, but it's a 1980 demo. It's more primitive. There's a really cool song called Dödsängeln, the Angel of Death. The rest is sort of still in the sort of rehearsal room, sort of like youth cafe style. Not bad, but if you buy this version, you might want to play the B-side first and the A-side second.
Yeah, I do prefer when they do them chronologically, but yeah, in this case, the second demo is the better one. And I'm glad you mentioned the production. I did not mention that, but yeah, sometimes people I think shy away from some of these anthologies because demo level sound quality can be an issue, but the material sounds absolutely fantastic. It's very professionally done. So you don't even have that strike against it, which almost every demo has that problem. And Jonah Quizz even dodged that. So good stuff.
I'm glad you said that though, because when I bust that one out later to listen to it again, I'm going to start with side 2. That might well be what sort of, stopped me from being grabbed by it,
Mm-hmm. Could be. All right. Well, back around to Dan. So, Dan, your second at bat.
Yeah, I'm thinking, should I pick a classic, which I will steal from you guys, or should I pick something obscure?
Whatever you want to highlight.
No, I think we need to pick a classic. We're still early in the stream. Yeah, I mean, if you're talking Swedish metal, this is one of those bands which I, of course, had to bring up, and everyone's favorites, Candlemass.
Right on.
Yes.
One of the most important Swedish bands ever, and a good segue from Jonah Quizz, of course, with Lundqvist singing, of course, on the Candlemass debut album. Yeah, Aaron, I want to hear your take on that one, because I'm going to be talking mostly about Nightfall.
Okay.
So you can follow up with that one if you want. Nightfall was Candlemass' second album and the first one with Messiah. I would say that I prefer maybe Lundqvist's vocals on the first one, but there's no denying that Messiah's voice was totally unique and sort of like the trademark of early Candlemass. And I mean, this is, as far as epic metal goes, Nightfall is, I mean, it's so perfect. I mean, it's really difficult to pick a favorite from this and Epicus, Doomicus, Metallicus. And coming back to this one, I actually played it for the first time in like a year, I think, or even 2 this week. And it is such one of the greatest sophomore albums ever made, I think. Imagining, I mean, making such an immortal 10 out of 10 classic like Epicus and following it up with this. I mean, the song "Well of Souls." It's such a bloody perfect opener. It's maybe the most underrated and greatest Candlemass song ever.
Just those opening lines too. Absolutely draws you into it. With it takes 2 vocal lines and that first big crushing riff, and it's sold. It's already legendary.
Yeah. I mean, every song is brilliant. The production is perfect. The cover is beautiful. It's an absolute masterpiece of epic doom metal. I don't have to sit here and sort of describe and dissect the sound, because I figure everyone should have heard this album. But to me, it is one of those albums that you can be proud of, that, yep, this was made in Sweden.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's not only one of the biggest Swedish metal albums, it's one of the biggest doom metal albums. So much of doom metal still lives in the shadow of those early Candlemass records. So many bands still just try to copy that note for note, and they never quite get it right. They some get close, but they just, it can't compare. Let's see. All right.
All right, well, on that note, I'll sit here and rep Ancient Dreams then.
Go right ahead.
Will not. Took me a while to get to this point, but this is my favorite Candlemass record. My inclination was, I mean, I got Nightfall first. Actually, the first one I got was Epicus Doomicus, and it didn't really blow my mind. So it took me like 10 years before I investigated further. And Candlemass was one of those bands, man, where I was like, they're okay, but whatever. And then actually someone played me. It was when that one with the white cover plate came out. I ran into a friend of mine, just like sort of out in the world. We were walking around. He was like, dude, listen to this. And he like gave me his earbuds, and it was the riff from Black Dwarf. And I was like, holy fuck, who is that? And he was like, that's Candlemass. I was like, Jesus Christ, what have I been missing out on? So I went back and investigated. And I love that record too. To this day, that's one of my favorite Candlemass records. But this one is probably my top one. In fact, it's not probably. This one is my top one. And even though it's funny, a lot of times when a record is really long, the way this one is, I'll kind of dock it a couple points for that, for overstaying its welcome. But I feel like even though this record takes longer than any other Candlemass record for the songs to get where they're going to, it doesn't feel like time wasted getting there. Like that journey, like every note of that journey on the way there is worthwhile, you know? Just starting with Mirror, Mirror, going all the way through. I mean, Bearer of Pain. Oh my God, what a chorus on that one. You know, Ancient Dreams, the title track, that's a song I can get in my head all the time. It's like it has the hooks, it has sort of the doominess, but I really kind of feel like this record in particular and Candlemass in general, or maybe more of a sort of a secret epic metal band than a doom band. Because I'm not the biggest doom guy. I mean, I like doom metal generally speaking, and there are a lot of doom bands I absolutely love. I mean, I can sit here and geek out over Pentagram as much as anyone else, right? But these guys just had something that really no other band with this sort of level of darkness had going on. And I really think it was probably that epic feel, just the ability to sort of craft this whole, like this whole, it feels hokey to call it a symphony, but like this whole, like all these different sections and parts into like one whole that would still cohere as a song, you know? And I don't really think they did that anywhere any better than on Ancient Dreams.
Yeah, I mean, that album is song-wise just as great as the two first ones. There's something about the mixing production which isn't really quite as dark as the two first ones.
That's true.
It's not like a big problem. It's sort of like, you know, we're talking like 95% versus 80, 90 or whatever. But yeah, if the two first ones are 10 out of 10s, that's a 9 out of 10. And there's so many cool tracks, like Darkness in Paradise is my favorite. My God,
it's a great one.
Great. Yep. And yeah, the cool thing about you don't even have to be like a doom metal fan to appreciate Candlemass, because at least at this stage in their career, there's so just basic epic metal in them. And it's funny that you mentioned that the self-titled Messiah Marklin comeback album. It is really great. My favorite from the later Candlemass stuff is the one after that, King of the Grey Islands. Yeah, okay. that is my maybe fourth favorite Candlemass album, I think. Yeah, totally
that's
great.
The coolest.
They made some great stuff later on as well.
Yeah, I saw them on that tour. They were really good, but you know, I was kind of wishing Messiah were with them. I'll be honest.
Understandable, but yeah, obviously one of the big metal exports. Let's see, one I'll show here fits up close to. I think they were maybe trying to do something a little similar to Candlemass, but not nearly as well known, since they did like one single and one split, and that was about it before they split. But it's got a little bit of that same, you know, kind of, you know, doomy and just maybe a little bit of an epic touch to it. It's a band called Hells, with one L, so Hels. This one came out in '85, and it has Birth on one side and Death on the other. So kind of playing into the theme there a little bit. You know, artwork on the back of the sleeve again. Yes, you know, very much going for the same kind of, you know, gothic graveyard imagery kind of stuff. You know, simple artwork kind of scheme, but reminds me a lot of all the new wave of British heavy metal singles. Just, you know, monochrome sleeve, you know, low budget affair, but effective. It gets the point across just fine. And yeah, always kind of liked this one. Again, the band's going for something that it's not overly doomy or anything, but you know, it's trying to work on that atmosphere and does it fairly well on the tracks. So Candlemass sometimes, you know, at first may seem like a little bit of an anomaly in the Swedish metal scene compared to a lot of bands, but there were other bands, you know, trying to do something, you know, that had those same kind of, you know, Black Sabbath qualities to them. There was, of course, before Candlemass, you had, you know, Leif working with, you know, the Nemesis, and had the EP with that and such too, the Day of Retribution. You know, Messiah was in Mercy, which has some tendencies, for that kind of sound too, a little different direction. But yeah, Swedish early on was, getting some bands, working on that doomy stuff. Maybe a little bit more so than the British scene. Not a lot of new wave of British heavy metal bands did that. But I've always thought it was cool that, several different Swedish bands were taking a stab at it. And I just always, this single is probably not going to ever make lists of the 10 greatest underground singles ever, but I've always liked it. I liked the approach that the band tried out. So if folks are looking for something more obscure to check out and like that overall vibe, dig around on YouTube and check out Birth and Death from Hells. And with that,
I've never heard of that record before, but that's the sort of one where if I were like flipping through or like looking around on Discogs or something and saw it, I'd be like, oh, I'll bet Alan has that one.
That's
has your name written all over it.
It kind of does. It is one that, yes, I first read about on DaN's 707 inches of Swedish steel article. I was like, that sounds interesting. And so, when I had a chance, I'm pretty sure someone probably posted, MP3s of it somewhere. Some sites used to, specialize in a little bit of that. So I'm pretty sure I had a chance to hear it before I tracked down a copy. It's just like, I should probably get that if I get a chance. And I got very lucky and stumbled into a copy a long time ago. But a cool underground artifact there.
The cool thing about Hells is that that 7 inch is definitely, I would say, fairly pure doom metal, and it's quite rare that you have doom metal private pressings from the mid 80s. There are not a lot of those internationally anywhere. Like private pressed doom metal 7 inches would in the 80s would make a very small list. So it's cool for that. None of those two songs are masterpieces, but they're really cool. The sleeve is cool. I just happened to have the compilation album that they were featured on called Clip Rock. The 7 inch is from 85. This one is from, I think, 87. Features another two tracks with Hells. Here, they are no longer quite doom, but I would say these two tracks are even better than the single. They're less doomy, but the two tracks here, I think they're called Halloween and what's the other name of the bloody track? Anyway, are more sort of like heavy load Gotham City style. Unfortunately, this one is at least as bitchy to find as the 7 inch, but they had a legacy, definitely.
Yep, very cool. Yeah, I don't know if I've heard the compilation track, so I'll have to dig and see if I've got those. If I do, I've kind of they've gotten lost in the MP3 bin.
I'm sure I've uploaded it on the Corroseum. So
yeah, I probably have it then. Just haven't dusted them off for a while. But all right, Dan, which direction you want to go next?
Let's go in a weird direction because Corroseum.
All right.
I used to have. When people ask me about my favorite Swedish metal bands, I used to name drop 4 bands, which was basically Candlemass, Gotham City, Band X, which we haven't talked about yet, and the Krigshjälters. And their posts after they changed their name to Omnitron. I don't know if you're familiar with these guys.
I'm not. No, I don't know that.
No. The Krigshjälters / Omnitron were a Swedish. They started out sort of like a punk crossover band, made punky crossover mini, and then sort of like a punky speed metal mini, and then a really cool speed power thrash. Quite original, but still solid speed power thrash LP in 88 or 89 or whatever it is. But I'm not going to talk about Krigshjälters album. I'm going to talk about when they, in 1990, I think, changed their name to Omnitron. And this album will not be for everyone, I think. This band after being sort of like quite influenced by Metallica, but still having a lot of sort of original, sort of very Swedish sounding influences, they continued with this in 1990 and released one of the most original Swedish heavy metal albums ever recorded. It suffers maybe some from some poorly aged 90s wackiness, but I wouldn't totally put it in this sort of like alterno metal niche at all. There are maybe a few pieces here and there which sort of suffers from some maybe too much of 90s experimentation. There's like a 20-second like rap spoof in one track or whatever, but one thing that makes everything up for it is the fact that these guys were amazing with writing really killer power thrash riffing and really amazing songwriters. Yeah, those are the guys. And this is not a really rare album at all in Sweden. You can find it for still like an equal of $10, 100 kronor in most of the record shops. And it's a bit hard to describe. There are some sort of like progressive thrash bits in it, but not in a like boring and difficult to listen to way. It's more like they've taken their time to put the songs together. As I said, not maybe a band for everyone, but if you appreciate semi-progressive power thrash, which really doesn't sound like anything else, you really should check out Omnitron. If you want to check out just one track to see if this is something for you, I would recommend maybe try out Triumph of What from this album. If you like that one, you'll love everything they ever did. If you don't like it, forget about it. A final typical Corroseum obscure reference point, fun way to describe them. These sound like a Swedish version of the Russian band Oblachny Cry. So now you know.
That's a good analogy, actually.
Have you heard this band?
I have that record because it was on one of your lists on the Corroseum. I think it was on the Metal Yardsticks list. I looked it up and it was like $10. I was like, well, shit, But it's also one of those where I haven't gotten my head around it completely yet. When I talk about the records that I come back 2 years after getting them, it's one that I pull out once a year and sort of go, okay. And the sort of 90s wackiness that you were kind of talking about, they don't ever quite fall off that ledge, but they stray really close to it at times. Yeah. And that's sort of been a little bit of a hang up for me with that record. But it is a really unusual record, and it's a hard record to describe. I think Oblachny Cry is probably as good a touch point as you're going to come up with on the Bad Boy, except that one's probably even more obscure. So,
but yeah, I agree with you totally. Cool that you got the comparison.
That's funny. Yeah, that's a really interesting record, though. I mean, I got a second what Dan said too, and I don't love that record either. But it's a record that challenges me. You know what I mean? And when a record does that, that's a record that keeps me coming back to it because it's great. It's a great record, obviously, but a record that keeps me coming back to it because I'm trying to figure it out. I kind of appreciate that. So it gets bonus points for that anyway.
Cool.
Isn't Stillborn from Sweden too?
What?
Isn't Stillborn from Sweden?
Yes, they are.
Okay, I won't say any more.
All right, but you will have to say something because it is your turn, Aaron.
All right. Okay, so this is my next pick because we really already kind of covered it, but I just want to show this real quick because I tell the story. I had no idea who this band was. I had heard of Candlemass, but I wasn't really into them yet when I first moved to San Francisco. And I found this at a record shop. And I had no idea what it was, but it was called The Day of Retribution, and it had this cover. And there's a song on it called Black Messiah. And it was on this label I'd never heard of called Fingerprint. I think it was like $8 at the time. And I was like, that was kind of a lot for a record in '94, but it made my spidey sense tingle. I joke about that a lot. This is one of the times that my spidey sense really steered me right. So trust your spidey sense. It's there because you need it. Since we're going off in sort of another funny direction, here's one that probably no one is expecting to see like this early in the show. Fucking Whiz, dude. I love this record. I think this is on Fingerprint too, actually. This is like the goofy one on Fingerprint. But this record is solid, man. Like, it has kind of a lot of keys on it. The quality of the art, I mean, is right up my alley. Let's be honest here. And at least as an English speaker, it's fun to say that I'm listening to Whiz. But I just love this thing, man. It has like the melodic hooks. It has the songs are great. It's a lot of keyboard for my taste, but I guess I've spent enough time with listening to what that Merciful Metal guy Thomas had to say that I can kind of hang with the keys these days. So would I have liked this record in 1986 or whenever it came out? I don't know when it came out. No, I probably would have hated it. But by the time I got it, 20 years after that, I was like, man, I can totally hang with this. And it's one that I like a little bit more every time I listen to it. So yeah, so don't sleep on Whiz. This is the Fingerprint record that people know about Axewitch and Gotham City and Nemesis, right? But no one ever talks about Whiz. So I was like, we're going to talk about him tonight.
Still available in all the sales bins here in Stockholm for money. So okay, I could probably set my up with a copy tomorrow.
Well, you should. I love that thing. Now, if you're in like death metal headspace, forget it. You know what I mean? If you're looking for Omnitron, wait on the Whiz. But if you're like, man, I feel like listening to a record that's a little bit goofy, but like actually really good in spite of a little bit of goofiness, and not like 90s goofy, like, too much synthesizer goofy. Yeah, Whiz, man, scratches the itch. I can always listen to that record, but I have a few like that.
Very cool. Very cool.
That was one where I was like, if I can handle the Mistreated record, this one is like pure metal compared to that shit. So, hey.
Very nice. All right, let's see. I'll show this next. This is not an old record, although I guess it's 20 years old at this point. But it's a nice compilation for folks that want to dig more into sort of these, the more obscure side of Swedish stuff. It's called Metal Nights and subtitled Resurgence of Swedish Steel, 1983 to 1985. And basically,
it's 85.
What's that?
What happened in 85?
The neutron bomb.
Random cutoff, 1986 was going to be volume 2, I guess, which didn't get released. But most of the bands on this, as far as I know, never really made it past the demo stage. A lot of them had like a demo and nothing else. There's a couple of exceptions, but yeah, for folks that like checking out those uber obscure bands, this is a nice compilation and kind of gives you a good. At the same time, it's not a bad introduction to early first wave of Swedish heavy metal. It'll definitely get you familiar with the sound, a little bit of variety among the bands. Yeah, like I said, it came out in 2003, and unfortunately, it's gotten a little pricey over the years. It was a limited run of like 500 copies, but a cool compilation. It doesn't have any big names on it. This does not feature Gotham City or Overdrive or Axewitch or anything. It's featuring bands like Stormbringer, and there's one I think just called Act or X. But also has like nice booklet. It's got pictures, bios on the bands and stuff. So again, if you want, a little more information to dig into the scene, it's a cool collection, and kind of summarizes a lot of, the early, this kind of, first era of Swedish metal that we've been talking about so far. Because like Dan said, you get into the mid 80s and the Swedish scene does get weird for a couple of years before we start to get into some of the heavier stuff, which we'll be definitely talking about. For those wondering, yes, we're going to get to some of those bands as well. But yeah, a cool compilation. If you can find it for a decent price, I would definitely recommend it as a good, just sort of overview of what bands were doing at the time.
Yeah, I mean, one of my late picks as well. yeah, shout out to Niklas who made this amazing compilation now. What is it? 21 years ago. It's a great collection of Swedish demos, and the funny thing is there's even more great stuff than on this comp. But it is indeed an excellent introduction to the Swedish early 80s metal scene. And the funny thing is that I think we're getting to where almost half the bands on this compilation now have like their own official reissues on
That's true,
like
yeah.
mostly cult metal classics so far, and a lot that has a lot to do with the dog's work of Janne Stark in recent years, who's hunted down a lot of these bands and convinced them to release their stuff.
Yeah, I've just noticed that even this year's, a few of them have gotten their cult metal classic anthology out. So yeah, if like Kamos just pointed out that copies of this on Discogs right now are over $100, which seems kind of unreasonable. But if you want to hear some of those bands individually, there's recently released things on Cult Metal Classics, so you can still check them out for a much better price than the compilation. But all right, let's spin around here, get Dan back up front and center, so he can show us yet another cool Swedish metal record.
Yeah, I think we're over an hour into the stream, so I mean, just to mix it up a bit, maybe it's time to bring out the first Swedish death metal album or release. I was when the Swedish death metal explosion sort of started in, I would say, let's say 89. There were earlier extreme bands as well, starting out already in like 87, 88. But when it really sort of exploded in the like 89, I was still doing tape trading. I used to buy every single demo I could ever get my hands on, mostly to just make my tape trading list bigger. And apparently people out there enjoyed Swedish demos. So my introduction to the Swedish death metal scene was mostly through just being a diehard collector of demo tapes. So, and through the years, it didn't stay with me for complicated various reasons. I never seldom came to pick up the full-length albums of most of these bands once they got to that stage. I do have some absolute favorite ones from the early days, and I think one of my absolute favorite Swedish death metal recordings ever, which was also one of the most groundbreaking and really trailblazing releases to this day. I'm gonna hype the very first EP with At the Gates, Gardens of Grief, because I freaking love this EP. You got to realize, guys, that when we heard this for the first time, and this was circulated on tape amongst friends, like half a year before it was released on vinyl, and we were blown away because we heard like the Entombed demos and stuff like that, and all the other demo bands. There's a reason that the Gothenburg sound happened, and a lot of other bands spun off on this. But here's sort of where it started, when suddenly the new wave of death metal became epic, or epic progressive, or whatever you want to call it. I think it all started here, and also the fact that these guys were in a bloody incredible live band back in the days. I managed to catch them 2 or 3 times around this time, and Tompa was one, such an incredible front guy, totally insane on stage, and with this absolutely majestic death metal music. And they were very much, I mean, their career, of course, took off with what was it, like their 3rd or 4th album,
Slaughter of the Soul.
What?
Slaughter of the Soul.
Yeah, Slaughter of the Soul, exactly. That's where they really took off. But here in the early days they were pure death metal, and but in a very epic, brutal way. And I mean, re-listening to this EP now, it is not really that super tight, but it was ahead of its time back then. And I mean, tracks like Souls of the Evil Departed and the song At the Gates, it was so different from the Stockholm death metal stuff, which I never really got into that much. It was a bit too much Death and Autopsy style for me. These guys were more atheist and Nocturnus. So yeah, naturally I got into this. So yeah, will forever be one of the honestly maybe one of the few Swedish death metal early releases which I really love. And I mean, Slaughter of the Soul is a great album, but it came out around the time when I wasn't really paying too much attention to that scene, so never became special to me in that way. But when this came out, seeing them live back then, that was some special shit. So yeah, my first death metal pick for the night.
Very cool, a good one to start with for sure. Yep, and yes, folks in the chat, we'll definitely have more Swedish death metal featured, fear not. But Aaron, what would you like to feature next?
Well, first, let me just say that a little sort of shout out to Marty and his crew, because I first heard about that record reading about it in Metal Maniacs. Not that one, though. It was Slaughter of the Soul. And then that one I just sort of came across one day and went, oh, I didn't even know the logo was different, right? So I was like, who is this? And I had to read the spine and went, oh, shit. And I think it was like cutout bin or something. So I took it home. I was like, yeah, this is completely different from Slaughter of the Soul. You know?
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit, right?
Yeah, they're more in the traditional death metal style. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, I didn't pull any death metal though, so we're going to go with this guy here. I already sort of dropped their name.
Yep, folks have been asking for it in the chat.
Here it is, Pray for Metal. Honestly, the record on Fingerprint, Lord of the Flies, has always kind of left me a little bit cold. It's another one where I can listen to it every so often. Maybe one day it'll click for me. But this EP I've always really liked, man. It's chunky, it's heavy, it's rocking, the songs are good. It just has everything you want, including the font, right?
Yep.
But even more than the font, I mean,
seen that before.
Come on, I'm always sold on that cover. So this is a blue one, in case people want to know.
I was wondering because that came on so many colors.
I knew you'd be wondering, even if no one else was.
Some came with a really huge poster as well.
Yeah.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, not this one. Although at least it doesn't have a sticker on it saying comes with really huge poster, like a Heavy Load record I have that does have that printed on it, but doesn't have the poster inside. So, what a great record, though, man! A record that lives up to the cover. It's just like the right level of primitive. Just awesome, fantastic. I don't know what else to say, man.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool. Early Swedish metal, and they never became huge favorites. I have most of the early stuff with them. I think my favorite tracks with them are actually some tracks that are hidden away on local compilations. They had their title track, the track Axewitch, and also a track, the best one, a track called Nightmare, which was really heavy, sort of around the same time as the EP. But yeah, a lot of people give them praise. I mean, it's a classic Swedish band, and that sleeve is priceless. It's can't get more metal.
What do you think about the album on Fingerprint? It's called Lord of the Flies, isn't it?
Yep, the Lord of Flies.
That one just feels anemic to me, but maybe I'm missing something. So tell me.
A lot of people are praising the ugly one, the purple one. What's it called?
Oh, I don't remember. I know it's
Hooked on High Heels or something like that.
Hooked on High Heels.
Hooked on High Heels. A lot of people are praising that one. I don't own it because I never really got into them. I should try to get that one, I guess.
Yeah. I kind of agree with you on Lord of the Flies, Aaron. It's got a few really good songs on it, but it also has some songs that are just kind of maybe a little bland. So it's a bit uneven. It's like, there's like a good song, but then you got to wait 2 or 3 tracks to get to the next really good song. So it's whenever I take out and play it, I kind of always feel like I wish I just had this like on CD or something where I could skip ahead rather than having to pick the needle up over and over. Not bad, but I do wish it was I wish it was just a little better. It needs like 2 more. Take out 2 of the bland songs and put 2 more really strong songs on it, and you'd have a really fine album.
Yeah, I don't know, man. Maybe I haven't heard the strong songs yet. I just feel like it's missing something. Like the whole album, it's like it's missing something.
It's got the production on it's a little funny. Doesn't ruin it or anything, but it does have a little bit of an odd sound. It's kind of heavy, but a little, I don't know how to describe it. It's almost like slightly hollow sounding or something.
Yeah, kind of watery, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe, yeah. Yep, I could see that.
More the metaphors than we come up with here. It definitely feels thin and kind of I don't know, man.
Yeah.
Like, if I were eating a bowl of like oatmeal that tasted like how that record sounds, I'd be putting more sugar in for sure.
Let's see. Yep. There's some love for Hooked on High Heels in the chat too. I haven't heard that one in so long. I can't even comment on it. It's been 20, 30 years.
That one, but now I want to know.
Yeah. I had it once upon a time, but do not anymore.
I don't think I did.
Well, let's see. Okay. So I'm up next. All right. I think we should probably, yes. Let's get to another one that folks, of course, folks have been very patient with us going through some obscure early stuff. So let's let the black cat out of the bag and let's talk Bathory. I picked The Return off the shelf because I feel like this album always gets a bit overlooked. Maybe folks just don't like it as much. Maybe it's just that they have so many good albums. I don't know. I've always liked this particular one. I like most of their albums quite a bit. For me, this one is where they start to really sound evil, but in their own way. The debut album, I like it quite a bit. But at times it will hit me as like, well, that kind of sounds like he's, doing his own version of Welcome to Hell, a little bit. This one doesn't. This one doesn't sound like he's, just following, Venom or Motorhead footsteps. It sounds like now he is really starting to strike off in his own direction and doing something that's just really crazy, over the top evil sounding. So yes, folks will probably quickly say that, the next couple of albums are much stronger. I wouldn't argue the point at all. I'm not going to die on this particular, moonlit hill trying to say this is better than those. Not whatsoever. But I think this album, really does start to let him develop his own sound. That Corroseum's like, yeah, I'm not just going to be, a Swedish Venom. I am going to do something different. And I think it worked out pretty well for him. I think we mostly can agree on that. But what are y'all's thoughts on Bathory? And Dan, we've talked about Candlemass, of course, being one huge tent pole for the entire Swedish heavy metal scene. I mean, Bathory's as big, if not bigger. Agree? Disagree? What do we think on early Bathory?
Well, I actually picked 2 Bathory albums because I had trouble choosing my
it's
favorite.
Hard. Yeah, it is hard.
It's one of these 2, or maybe the debut. We talked about the Return on our Evil Metal stream a couple of weeks back. That was definitely the first where they started really sounding like Bathory, and where the album that sort of invented true black metal in that sense. So it's a really cool album for that reason. I never became a personal fave of mine. For me, if I would pick one, would be the third one, of course.
I think most folks would agree with you.
Yeah, Under the Sign of the Black Mark. It is their number.
It's a better album. I'm not going to. I won't deny it at all. No.
This was like the perfect where they really came into their own. They kept the brutality of the return made it even more extreme, and also started playing around with the epic stuff, like Enter the Eternal Fire, and just like the chorus to Woman of Dark Desires, and I mean, everyone has heard this. I mean, it's not that much to speak of, but for me, this is the quintessential Bathory album, basically. And probably it's one of the 3 greatest albums from Sweden. This one, one Candlemass album, can't make up my mind, one of the 2 first, and maybe Black Ritz with Gotham City. Those are the 3 ones.
Okay, someone was asking earlier, what you would consider some of like the big top Swedish releases. So there you go, a top 3 from DaN.
And maybe if you'd asked me like 10, 20 years ago, I would have had an Omnitron as well. But I mean, I haven't listened to it that much. But those are the 3 classics. I would probably, if you guys had beaten me to Under the Sign, I would pick up Hammerheart. Because, I mean, Bloodfire Death is, of course, almost as great as those 2 albums. It is bloody perfect. Well, actually, Bloodfire Death was the first Bathory album I really got into.
Oh, okay.
But as far as really groundbreaking masterpiece, Hammerheart, I mean, first he invented black metal, and then he invented Viking metal. And his Viking metal stuff never really got as good again as Hammerheart. Twilight of the Gods has great music, but really not that good vocals. But Hammerheart is such a masterpiece. Really, I mean, no one has to be into like black metal in the least to really appreciate this. This is like as perfect as epic metal goes, and it's a lot of diversity in the tracks, which I really enjoy as well. There are some like slow, epic, atmospheric stuff, and there's also like really heavy, riffy stuff that could sort of fit into the 2 previous albums. And the last Bathory masterpiece. And I mean, picking a fave between this one, Under the Sign, and the debut. I mean, different days, different feelings, but
well, very different styles. I mean, it's hard to compare them. Yeah.
And one thing there are some, I don't know, not as much nowadays, perhaps, but I've heard through the years people who sort of dissed this one because he sort of stopped playing extreme music or black metal. You have to respect him. I don't think that this was a conscious choice. He just wanted to do his own stuff. But imagining him continuing after releasing Bloodfire Death in which year did it come out? It was 88.
Bloodfire Death was 88, I'm pretty sure.
And sort of around 88, 89, the death metal scene started exploding on the world. Imagining him continuing to do extreme music. I mean, Bathory had the ultimate opportunity to become the Metallica of death and black metal, basically. He had that opportunity. But no, I want to do Hammerheart, and the rest is a sordid history, sort of. But I always find that sort of fascinating that Bathory could have been like mainstream huge death black metal, but thankfully it didn't happen. I don't know. We got Hammerheart instead, and I'm probably more happy with that.
Yeah, he was almost just too far ahead of the rest of the black metal pack. That by the time everybody was catching up, he had already moved on to the Viking metal thing, like you said. Yeah, Aaron, what are your takes on Bathory?
Yeah, you want to hear a hot take on Bathory? I'm kind of sick of hearing about Bathory.
Fair enough.
See what the chat has to say about that. I actually literally, you saw my fingers there. I was putting Hammerheart in Discogs cart because I've actually never sat down and listened to that one, but I do have the first 4. The first one is probably my favorite. That might just be because it's the one I've pulled out the most, because that's kind of how I tend to go into bands. I start at the beginning and then go through it. But I kind of like Quorthon's take on Venom. But I mean, I like those records. The first one's probably my favorite, probably then Under the Sign of the Black Mark, pretty close with Blood, Fire, Death, and the Return probably at the bottom. But I agree with what you said about the Return, as far as it being sort of wonkier and darker and sort of more evil even than the first one, or evil in a more nuanced way at the very least. But I just feel like the amount of talk that Bathory gets, the amount of hype that they get relative to the quality of the musical output, like the actual quality of the musical output, as opposed to the influence, which I think is undeniable. It just seems kind of out of whack to me, man. When I'm talking about like great 80s records, I don't even think of Bathory most of the time, So, yeah, I'm waiting for people in the chat to start freaking out at me, but it's not really happening. Maybe there are a lot of like closet like Bathory haters there too. Except I'm not a Bathory hater. I mean, I like Bathory just fine, but
I'm sure Simon will tell you to leave the hall here in a minute. He's probably just still sputtering with rage trying to get to the keyboard.
Someone did say this earlier. One of my favorite things is that people, even now, after 20 years of eBay or whatever, will still list their record as Bat Lord, which I think is actually a really good band name, Bat Lord. But
yeah, that would work.
One of my best friends always used to call them Bathory. Shout out to Stefan, Bathory. Yeah. No, but I mean, Under the Sign and Blood, Fire, Death, as far as extreme metal goes in the late 80s, for me, they always trumped so much of the death metal stuff that came a couple of years later. Mm-hmm. I'll politely disagree with Aaron there. I think their hype for at least the 5 first album is well reserved. They were unique. They sounded like a completely alien band. If you listen to like remember the old Speed Kills compilations?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Any compilation from back in the day where Bathory was featured,
they stuck
even
out
together with other thrash bands or whatever. And yeah, cool, brutal, cool. And then you hear Bathory, and it's like, this is from another planet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
They were and they were so great at being completely alien in their extremeness, and still making really cool songs. Yeah.
I kind of wish so that Bathory had been sort of a one-off instead of like this long, admittedly interesting career. You know what I mean? I feel like if there were one of those records that just sort of came and went and no one noticed until years later, and people like us are going, oh, holy shit, this one's going to blow your mind. I almost feel like it would be a little bit more special then, but because of all that hype, I think it just builds it up too much. You know what I mean? And the actual substance, I just don't hear it.
The 5 first. No, there could be a 5 off, maybe.
Yeah. That's more important records than most bands make, though. Which, I mean, I've got to give Bathory too. I mean, I'm not a very big Bathory fan, and I have 4 of their records. And I listen to all 4 of those too. So I mean that really tells you something as far as the quality of it, I suppose. But yeah, I just feel like there's some circles where you can't have a conversation about metal without spending a lot of time on Bathory, and I'm just like, come on, man, there's so much else out there. So that's my hot take on Bathory, though.
I know the phenomenon. Yeah.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah, they are a big thing for sure. Sorry, someone asked something in the thing on. Oh, Hanzo. No updates on that lately. I've been meaning to email him and find out. So maybe we'll find out in the near future. But yeah. Landmark thing. Dan, I believe it. Let's see. Yeah, Bathory was my pull, so actually it is Dan's turn.
No, but that's I did my Bathory thing. So.
Oh, okay. Well, okay.
I thought I made a pretty long monologue about Bathory, so
fair enough.
I had it sort of lined up. So
fair enough. Since Aaron has heard enough of Bathory, we'll let Aaron steer.
Why did my Bathory thing too? So I wish get back to Dan. Because I'm going to run out of records before either of you two, too. So,
do you want me to move on to something else for a spin?
Oh yeah, just go ahead.
Okay, let's see. Yeah, we all with Bathory, we all got our 2 cents in. Let's see. In that case,
it did come, by the way. The chat kind of lit up. I was waiting for that. It must have been that delay.
There's always that like 9-second delay. Let's see. We'll go into sort of a different direction. Some folks mentioned earlier they were really hoping we would remember to bring up Swedish power metal, and yes, did make sure to pull some of that too. Swedish has made some good contributions to that over the years. personal favorite that came up through the 1990s was Nocturnal Rights. This is their debut in a time of blood and fire, which is a fantastic name for an album. I will never. This right here is why I will never be in a band and never make an album, because the best title that I wanted has already been took, and there's just no point now. But yeah, and here are the guys at the time. And if one of them looks a little older than the rest, that's because, yes, we've got a Gotham City alum on vocals here. And Nocturnal Rights started out as a much heavier project. They were death or black metal. They were doing a more extreme metal thing at first, and ended up morphing into a very good European power metal type band, and ended up with recruiting a vocalist who is possibly old enough to be their dad for the first several albums. But he sounds absolutely fantastic on these early albums. Nocturnal Rights never quite got as much attention as some of the other power metal bands coming out of Europe in the mid and late 90s. They ended up a little bit in the shadow of, Blind Guardian and Stratovarius and Rhapsody. But they're every bit as good, if not better, than those acts. They had a good career. They're one of those bands that technically on Metal Archives says they are still active, but they haven't made an album in like 15 years. So I'm sorry, you're just not really active at that point. I guess you can, if maybe they're still hitting all the big live festivals and stuff. I don't know. Was lucky enough to see them play live once. I'm not sure they ever really played in the States many times, but they did play Atlanta's Prague Power one year. And so, I got to chat with them in the autograph line. Really nice guys, very, very humble. The audience was blown away. They were by far the best band of the weekend. And it wasn't even much of a contest. And there were some very good bands that weekend. And Nocturnal Rights just absolutely smoked everyone. So, they just one good example of Sweden's contributions to the power metal scene. And that will be my call for this round.
I've never heard them, honestly. But that kind of wasn't really my scene. In fact, I went to a Stratovarius show once. I didn't really even go inside, though. I just hung outside with people, like with friends and smoked cigarettes. Like, I think I looked in the door once.
You didn't inhale.
I was inhaling. I just wasn't.
Were there dolphins? Let's just cut to the chase. Were there any dolphins? Did they have a giant pool set up on the stage with dolphins, playing and splashing around?
Yeah, I don't think so. But if anyone in the chat remembers the Pound in San Francisco, that's where the show was. And I went with a friend of mine who worked for Thrasher, and he was on the list. So if I'd paid for tickets, I might have tried a little bit harder to see a couple minutes of them. But yeah, I think I looked in the door while they were playing, but I just hung out outside. So that's as close as I've gotten to Nocturnal Rights, is smoking cigarettes outside of a Stratovarius show.
That's
it's not very close.
No, I'm sorry. As someone who tried really hard to like Stratovarius and never quite got over that dolphin-shaped hump, you're not quite in the right zip code yet, Aaron. All right, let's see. Since that was my pick, that means it is back to Mr. Dan.
Yeah, I was thinking about Nocturnal Rights. I'm not sure. I probably have heard them sometime long ago. Do not remember for a second what it sounded like. But didn't Anders Zachrisson sing with them?
Yes, he's with them on the first 3 albums.
Yeah, who also sang on the last Gotham City album.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, so there is a connection there, at least.
When he said it was just the Gotham City guy, I assumed it was probably the guy on The Unknown, but I deliberately didn't ask because in my head canon I wanted it to be Ola Olsson.
That would have been Oli awesome, but nope. But no, Zachrisson sounds really good on those first 3 albums. The replacement vocalist they got too, I forget his name at the moment, but he was also very good. So they did the rare thing of finding a good vocalist to replace a good vocalist.
Yeah. So next band or next artist, because this is going to be a tribute to one of Sweden's biggest secrets as far as it comes to songwriting. the guitarist Janne Strand played in a lot of bands through the 80s, 90s, and the 2000s. Or he had a history of recording or writing and recording some of Sweden's greatest metal music ever. And it didn't really come on an official release until like the 2010s when an old album got reissued on CD. But let's start from the beginning. One of his first bands was a band called Act, who were also featured on this one.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
This is the type of absolute top quality, original heavy metal, great riffs, great songwriting that in any other country in the world except for Sweden in the early sort of 83, 84-ish era, this band would have had an album out, but not in Sweden because reasons. Had they come from Holland, Belgium, Germany, we will all know about Act, or as they were called later, Verdict. I think they were called like Act with a C, then Verdict, then Act with a K, or the other way around. And this type, the sort of style is it's definitely on the same heavy, evil, cool type of metal, sort of like in the Merciful Fate vein. I mean, it's not occult or satanic in every way, but it is the same heaviness, the same sort of care to songwriting and riffmanship. And they, in the late 80s, they became Zanity, and well, let's say finally in like 89 and onward, they became Master Massive. And as Master Massive, they released even more demos because, I mean, there were Verdict, Act demos. And then as Master Massive, they were active as Master Massive for like, I mean, they're still active, I think. They released a mini CD a couple of years ago. But there's so much amazing demo material with this band. And Master Massive is sort of epic power thrash. I mean, intricate, but I wouldn't say. If I say it's progressive, you will all think about weird, bloody Watchtower crap or whatever. No, not crap. Sorry, but it is not weird metal in any way. It's just very well written, fantastic power metal, basically. Power thrash, heavy metal, amazing riffing, really epic choruses, lots of diversity between the tracks. And it's such a basic quality metal ship that it's hard to put a finger on. I remember for many years I had this mantra that the greatest sin against metal history was the fact that the Hell demos were never re-recorded or never re-released, and then like decades ago or now, I guess, they finally were. And number 2 on my list were always Master Massive, and a huge shout out to Janne Stark, who shared a lot of this stuff back in the day, and also was responsible for getting at least 20% of the Master Massive demos out on a single LP. There's so much killer stuff still not released with this band, but this album came out like less than a year ago. It's some of the great demo material this band released on Cult Metal Classics. I mean, I can't hype this band enough. I think they're if we're talking definitely Sweden's most underrated band from back in the days. Wow. You know, there's a couple of new bands which I think are really underrated but from older bands, Sweden's greatest hidden treasure, really. And even the old Act and Verdict stuff. But I think especially even as Master Massive, they were even better than the early mid-80s stuff. So I don't know what to compare it to. If you're gonna, I mean, it's definitely in the same genre as as far as I remember them, Nocturnal Rights or bands maybe like Morgana Le Fay or something like that. But this is much better. This is like way better songwriting, more original, everything. This is so over the top, and it is a complete mystery that this never got released back when it should have. A complete treasure as far as Swedish metal goes. So Master Massive, do check them out. Really, it is a really cool band. Have you guys heard them or any of these bands?
I've heard a little bit of the Act material, but no, I have not heard any of the Monster Massive. So I'll definitely have to go check that one out. Aaron, do you know them?
Nope.
Check out that album. It is killer.
Yeah, no, I don't know a fucking thing about anything that Dan just said, but I'm taking it in, believe me.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. To US to US metal distributors, it would help if you'd get more like, cult metal classics and No Remorse stuff in. There are people in this country that will buy that shit if somebody will bring it into the US so we don't have to pay $25 shipping every time we want to order a record. Yeah. Just throwing that out there as an idea to folks. If you like making money selling heavy metal records, there's not a lot of availability for some of these really cool reissues in these states right now. So
I guess
there you go, free money. You
I guess
you have that idea.
One problem with the Candlemass Classics vinyl reissues, at least, I don't know how it is with the CDs, but the vinyl reissues, they are almost sort of like pre-order ones. There's a reason that if you look at how limited these albums are nowadays, which is usually between like 100 and something up to 200, maybe. I don't think they're even like 300 copies. They're usually, the editions are based on pre-orders. So they are even more, these kind of vinyl reissues today are even more limited than before. So I imagine that they would be quite tricky to get in the US. There's probably a couple of US distributors who get this, but they're going to be expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You can. Yeah, if you poke around, you can find someone that has them. But yeah, it can be a little. It would be nice if there was just maybe a little competition to, keep the prices from getting too high. But I didn't know that they were basically almost pre-order only type pressings. That explains a lot. So it goes. But no, it sounds really interesting. That's definitely on the to check out list for sure. All right, Aaron, you are up next.
Well, I'm going to show this one. Here's another really good record that doesn't get talked about a lot. Trouble from Chicago. Just kidding.
Not that Trouble.
From Sweden. This is a fantastic record. This is another one that I like a little bit more every time I hear it. Now, the cover's a little bit misleading because this does not sound like, it does not sound like swole dude with a sword. But it definitely sounds like metal. Great hooks, little Swedish magic. Another component to the Swedish thing, I think, is there in Sweden, the Swedish singers tend to sing with sort of a dark tone, which is actually kind of something where you get more like in classical singing training, I've noticed. You know what I mean? Like jazz singing tend to get more of a bright sound with a darker sort of a tone, like the stupido face, like face when you're singing, that sort of thing. I think they're doing that. So this has that too. Has the extra little sword on the bottom on the back there, just in case the front didn't tell you they were serious. And for me, it always ends up coming down to the songs, but I think the songs are really good on this thing. This record kind of, it slows down a little bit in a couple places and, maybe lose momentum a little bit, but it picks it back up then and keeps on going ahead. And it's a really good record, man. As far as I know, this is their only record, Warrior by Trouble. And it's on the Artist Records label, if that's even a label. If it is, it's one of many who did not have a license deal with Metal Blade. And I'm pretty happy to rep this thing. It's a really cool record. What do you guys think of it?
I've always heard good things about it, but I've never gotten to hear it. So, don't know. But it has a good reputation. Dan, what do you think of it?
The sleeve is an absolute piece of art. It's one of those perfect metal sleeves. Yeah, it is a good. It's a good, really well played and a solid hard rock metal Swedish sounding. The hard rock metal album, really high quality. It is I would say they were sort of a one-hit wonder, and I don't say that lightly, because when I say one hit, I mean Swedish Trouble made one of the greatest Swedish hard rock / heavy metal songs ever recorded. Definitely on my top 10 list of any song ever from Sweden. Ask anyone who's been on record parties in my place, this song comes on, or when we're at the stereo at some festival or whatever, this song always comes on, and it is the song Mr. Rock and Roll on the Trouble Warrior album. The song Mr. Rock and Roll, if this band had made like even a really cheesy, crappy, but at least like a promo video of this song and spread it around this time, when bands like Twisted Sister and Helix and all these bands, became famous for the videos. That is such an incredible sing-along metal stadium hit. Mr. Rock and Roll is an absolute epic hard rock masterpiece. The chorus and the last part of that song, it is total goosebumps inducing epic hard rock metal. If you want to take notes for the stream of tonight to cool songs to check out, Swedish Trouble from the album Warrior, Mr. Rock and Roll. It is a complete masterpiece. It overshadows, unfortunately, the rest of the album, but yeah.
Yeah, well, put it close to the end at least. You put your best shit at the end, so you know what you're doing. It's funny you call it a hard rock metal, because I wanted to call it that, but I played it just before. When I was doing my little refresher, getting myself into the right headspace. And I tend to think of that as being sort of like a hard rock heavy metal record, like sort of straddling that line. But every time I play it, it actually sounds more sort of metallic to me than hard rockish, Maybe that just means that I've been listening to a lot of wimpy hard rock over this past year, which is probably true. But if you want a metal record, at least what I call metal, I don't think you'd be disappointed with that one. But it is sort of on the hard rocky side of metal, so it's worth pointing that out.
All right, good deal. Yeah, someday I need to dial the album up, and now I know which song to start with. Because I've always heard it, I've always known that cover, but have not come across that one. All right, let's go into
where I looked at the cover enough times. And one day I was just like, fuck it, I want that record. I don't care what it sounds like.
You want it when you see it.
Indeed. All right, let's go in yet another direction. We've touched a little bit on Swedish black metal with their origins in Bathory. A lot of other bands have, of course, proliferated in that scene, especially with kind of second wave black metal. One of the earliest, a long-time fan favorite, has to be Marduk. And when you say Marduk, I think most people immediately think of this album, Panzer Division Marduk. I always forget this is their 6th album. It always seems like it's earlier. I forget how quickly they put out albums, because a lot of black metal bands, were a little slow to release things early on. But yeah, Marduk got 6 albums out in the 1990s. But yeah, this is kind of the one that people often go back to as just kind of almost the template for the very sort of extreme, over the top Swedish black metal sound. Sweden kind of quickly developed its own sound of black metal compared to what, their neighbors in Norway were doing. You can usually put a band on and tell pretty quickly it's if they were Swedish or if they were Norwegian. And Marduk was one of the bands that really did kind of, help build that mold for, the very, raw, very blasphemous, sort of no frills and just, straightforward energy, just want to, crush your skull in a style of black metal. And it all just comes together on this album. It's a very good representation of that. Marduk's one of those bands I tend to like a lot of their songs. I actually got to see them live in North Carolina, of all weird places. And it was a pretty fun show. But I don't really go back and play their full albums very often. It's more like I want to hear a few songs off of Dark Endless, or I want to hear a couple of songs from those of the Unlight. But I usually won't stay for the whole album. Panzer Division Marduk is a pretty easy one to put on and just let it play because it's just a wall of sound. It hits, it's unrelenting, it doesn't overstay its welcome. I've noticed that, and kind of funny enough, looking at it over on Metal Archives, I would have assumed this album would have a really high ranking, considering how many people always cite it as a favorite. And it actually comes in at over 21 reviews. It has a rating of 70%, which seems surprisingly low. I don't know if this is an album people have just drifted away from over the years, or again, some people, have issue with Marduk over other things, and maybe, they're sort of hate reviewing it. I haven't looked at the whole list. Maybe it's just Metal Archives being Metal Archives. Their rankings don't always make a lot of sense. Yeah, but had to obviously touch on Marduk for Swedish metal. Different direction. There's a couple of different directions that Swedish black metal go in. We'll touch on at least one of those other directions in a little while, but wanted to definitely get this into the mix. It felt like it was the right time to bring it up. Don't know if either of y'all are into Marduk much or not.
Yeah, I also one of those bands, where back in the days when I used to buy demos from all bands in the world. So I mostly listened to the first demo. Sounds snobby, but I just demos. The funny thing is that the first time I heard Marduk was when my old friend from school, we lived in the same suburb outside of Västerås, and he moved to was it Söderköping, close to Norrköping, and he wrote to me, me and a friend, we just started a band, we're called Marduk. Here's our first rehearsal.
Oh, okay.
So I got a instrumental rehearsal of one of the early demo songs. And this is pretty cool. And bought the demos and everything. And once they started releasing albums, my music interest was in a different space, and I sort of lost contact with him. But Jocke Göthberg, if you're out there, feel free to reconnect. It's been ages. But no, I never got into. I never had the opportunity or to get into their albums much. A lot of people are praising that particular album, Panzer Division Marduk, as being their most extreme one, and it's all super fast, and it's really cool. I'm as surprised as you that it was so lowly rated. But very classic Swedish black metal band for sure. Yeah,
folks. Pointing out some other Marduk albums that are favorites, and they've been around a long time and done a lot of good albums. But at least for a long time, it seemed to be the album. So it is surprising to see it ranked lower. But folks are mentioning in the chat too that so there may be some just sort of hater reviews mixed in there, and that is a thing that happens with bands like that sometimes.
I'm not a big Marduk fan, but I am a total sucker for album titles that use the band name in the title, like Demon, Night of the Demon, or Grave, Into the Grave. Right. And Marduk, Panzer Division Marduk.
Iron Maiden.
That's not quite the same thing. You got to have a couple extra words, but just the right number, If you have like a really long title, I won't listen to your record either, Like some of these, that was kind of a thing for a while. It's like these really long titles. And if you're Demolich, you can get away with that. But if you're not, I won't buy your album if it has too long a title. So there's a fine line you got to walk. It's a pretty wide line. It's not very fine.
So not a Bal Sagoth fan, Aaron? Not buying many of their albums? No. They did get better about that after the first two or three. See. All right. Well, we've had some good blackened metal fun. Let's see what Dan has up next.
I'm going to grab a drink, so don't talk too fast.
We're going to continue with with black metal fun, and let's talk about the second best black metal band ever from Sweden, and one of I guess, the most popular bands in this genre, one of the most classical bands, one of the most cultified ones, and one of my all-time top favorites. We can't have a Swedish metal stream without talking about the almighty Niflheim.
Ah, cool.
And it was a hard pick for me to choose between the third and the fourth album. Should I pick Number of the Beast, or should I pick somewhere Peace of Mind? I'm going to go with Number of the Beast, aka Servants of Darkness, their third one. Niflheim was what genre should we call it? This is black metal. This is black speed metal at amazing pace, and they really came into their own on, I think, their third album, Servants of Darkness. Super fast, extremely evil, bloody, insane, totally original black speed, satanic, devil worshipping metal at its absolute best. There is a reason that there are few. It's one of those bands where you see T-shirts and patches on basically any metal fan on a festival. There's a reason you see this logo everywhere. It is not. It's not because of shallow hype. This band is loved for a reason, and amazing, really bloody great songwriters. And the reason I appreciate this band so much over a lot of other sort of second, third, whatever generation you want to call it, black metal, is I think the guys in this band and me share a love for some old cult bands like, let's say, Master's Hammer or Tormentor or bands like that.
Mm-hmm.
They are not like a total, pure Bathory rip-off band. You hear a lot of Bathory in their stuff. It's maybe more on the two first albums, but on the third and fourth one, they really sort of have found their own unique style, but picking some really delicate, weird things from some old East European bands, as well as just mixing it up. I mean, I think the originality of Niflheim is often underrated. They're sort of hyped as a really evil extreme band, but I mean the songwriting is so cool. And I mean this one and Envoy of Lucifer is usually the favorites for people, and there's so many live favorites on this album. I sort of gravitate towards the songs that they never play live, like the really weird War of Doom, or stuff like Infernal Desolation, or Into the Morbid Black, and these weird songs, because I mean, they're really great at making extreme black metal that sounds old school and totally original at the same time. It is such an absolute quality band. Very loved. I don't want to use the word hyped, but there is a reason that we see their logo everywhere, and one of Sweden's post-millennial greatest bands, and one of the few bands in this genre which I really truly love. I don't gravitate towards it that much, but the way they do their songwriting and their albums is one of those truly great Swedish metal bands, basically. So are you big Niflheim fans, guys?
I don't know too much by them. I have got just a little bit, and I've liked what I've heard. It's just a band I've never explored. But you make a really good point about them, being one of these evil extreme bands. That's a combination that becomes generic very, very easily if you're not careful. And Niflheim, based on the little bit of stuff I have heard, they aren't they're not just another generic band doing that. Like you said, they definitely have their own sound going on, which is cool. So yeah, a band, it's the kind of band, whenever the day will come, I'll stumble upon it, in the used bin for, like, $8 or $10 on a CD, and I'll buy the whole stack of them at once when I do. That day just hasn't, I haven't wandered into the record store on the right day just yet, but it's always on my radar. Aaron, what do you know about them?
I'm glad I'm not the only one here who doesn't have a whole lot of experience with them, because I consider them to be kind of a hole in my knowledge, really. But when the original albums were coming out, I was too busy collecting like 70s krautrock shit to pay attention. And then when I sort of had a resurgence of that kind of metal a few years ago, I just didn't come across it.
Yeah,
like I got most of the sort of the classic sort of death thrash records that I was looking for, like well, I mean, most of them, but like Monstrosity, I never found. Cemetery, I never found. And Niflheim, I never found.
Yeah, I've got a split 7-inch with them, and I think it's Volcano.
Yeah.
And I want to say I've got like maybe one other split or something, but I'm drawing a blank on which one. So, yep, yet another one that got to dig into. Absolutely. But yeah, awesome pick. I completely blanked on them for a Swedish band. So, yeah, very glad you pulled them, Dan.
We're going to dig into. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Well, what would you like to dig into next year, Aaron?
All right, we've kind of played danced around this band a little bit, so I'm just going to go ahead and show it, since this is one where I actually have the records. Fucking this!
Oh yeah,
absolute classic over here.
It's time for sure.
And I mean, I think we all love Heavy Load here. Absolute great band, epic. I mean. Yeah, I mean, I started saying things like Swedish magic to describe records like this that like are great songs, great performance, everything else, but this then has that little extra something special that just sort of puts it even up to the next level from there. Yeah, and this is just the whole package. I have a little story about this record that I'll tell. So I got like a lot of my records. I got a lot of my shit in the early days of eBay. Because people romanticized the 90s when records were cheap, but just because records were cheap doesn't mean you'd find something like this at your local shop. In the early days of eBay, before the prices started going up, that was when I really got most of my shit like this. But this actually came through my local record store here in Charleston, probably 8 years ago now, something like that. I went in though. Actually, it was one of those deals where one of the guys called me on a Saturday morning. He was like, "Hey man, are you doing anything right now? Because we just got a big metal trade in. And I don't know what to do with this stuff." And I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll be right down." So I went over there. I was going through it, started giving him some ideas. I saw this one. I was like, "Oh, holy shit. I can't believe they got the copy of this one." And there were two guys who worked there standing there. And the one guy was like, "Yeah, I saw that. But, I kind of, I kind of flipped past it because it has a guy fighting a polar bear on it." And I was like, "No, dude, you need this record because it has a guy fighting a polar bear on it."
Exactly.
And him and another guy there who had also ignored it started like arguing over who was going to get to take it. I was like, right on, man. So yeah, that's my little story of like hyping Heavy Load out in the wild. But I mean, yeah, even the art. I mean, the style of painting is just right for this shit. I mean, and this one does have the bonus single. I'll draw everyone's attention. So.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah, absolute classic. If you don't know Heavy Load, do yourself a favor. And, I pulled this one because this is kind of the one to pull and might be my favorite. But there's no bad Heavy Load record. Probably the weakest Heavy Load record in my estimation, actually, is this one, the first one.
It's, as Dan said earlier, it's very different. Yeah.
But here's the thing. This is still a really good record. It's just... given that the one you're least likely to come across is also the weakest, don't fucking worry about it. If you come across Stronger Than Evil before you come across that one, grab it. Metal Conquest. Those records are just as good as that one. And maybe I haven't played them twice as much, but that's just where my function of where the chips have fallen, not the quality of the records. So absolute bangers. There you go. Yeah. I mean, it kind of sounds like it's still 78, and it kind of sounds like they're still finding their footing, I mean, their accent is extra entertaining on that record, so you got to take the bad with the good, I suppose. The good being the accent. Yeah. But, For 78, it sounds like a more fully realized heavy metal record than just about anything else. You know, if you want to pull out a record that from 78 that sounds more like a modern heavy metal record than Full Speed at High Level, you pretty much have to go to something like Stained Class.
Yeah. The cool thing about Full Speed at High Level is that the actual songs, there are some actual great killer songs on it. Songwriting wise, it's not that far behind from the later stuff, and it's not necessarily less heavy, but the mixing, production, and the vocals are a bit, second rate. But I mean, of course, we have to talk about Heavy Load on a stream like this. Really cool band. I never became a die-hard fan of them for some reason, but I became a fan eventually. But I only I've had the albums for ages, I listened to them on and off, but I really started appreciating them for real, like in the last maybe couple of 5 years or something like that, where I actually started to realize that this is actually this is actually way over par.
Dude, isn't that a great feeling? Like when you come to a band really late, but then you sort of get to feel like I held this band back for myself.
Yeah.
Like at 50, I haven't heard all the best bands yet. I've heard a lot of them, right? But there's some I'm still holding back for myself, and I don't know where they are yet. I'm going to find them eventually. It's going to rule. That's what you're doing with Heavy Load, man, and I salute you for that.
Yes, like that.
Good deal. Have y'all heard the new album? I believe it was earlier just this year, or maybe it was late last year.
I heard some of the tracks live on Keep It True. Was it last year? Yeah.
Okay.
I haven't dared to buy it because the reviews have been mixed. I mean, they've been mostly good. Mm-hmm. Some complaints about a couple of tracks / maybe half the album, or what, I don't know, a couple of tracks not being quite up to par. But they played a couple of new tracks when they played it Keep It True, which sounded great. So I probably should pick it up. Haven't done so yet. I'm a bit scared. I'm a scaredy cat when it comes to old bands making new albums.
Yeah, you and I are both
burned before, so
yeah, you and I are both tend to be a little gun shy on that. I've heard it like once or twice, and it didn't immediately blow me away, but I would need to play it a few more times before really rendering any kind of verdict on it. But yeah, I have seen mixed reviews. Some folks have really liked it, and some other folks have said that just go back to your bear cave and stay there, please. So we'll have to see how that shakes out.
That bad. There are great songs on it, but it might be uneven. That might be the problem.
Mm-hmm. Could be.
I definitely tend to shy away from when bands sort of reform after a long period of time. But not all that long ago, I pulled up my copy of Perfect Strangers by Deep Purple, which I still think is probably the best comeback record ever. And I remember when that came out, it was like, oh, this is this old band that had just reformed, and they were so much older than like during the classic days. And I was putting it on, it occurred to me that I'm older. I was older at the time I was listening to that than Ian Gillan was when he sang that record. And I was calling him the old guy. And I was like, fuck. It was one of those moments.
Yeah, that those kind of when that realization hits, it's never fun. Let's see. Vegan Metalhead just mentioned something that's close to my next pick. Mentioned Dismember. That, of course, Swedish death metal sound is iconic for the country's metal scene. Haven't touched on it. I didn't pull Dismember. I decided I would pull the other one. Entombed's Left Hand Path. One of those iconic death metal albums that, again, defined a scene, helped it explode, also spawned way too many copycats over time. Now, Dismember not necessarily being one of those. They sound a little different and were coming up side by side with Entombed. So not, casting any shade at Dismember. I will take Left Hand Path over the early Dismember albums. It's just personal preference there. But yeah, death metal, of course, was already becoming big stateside. You had bands popping up elsewhere. And then Entombed in Sunlight Studios develops, this very unique, what we now know as like, the HM2 sound, and the world loses their shit over this album. And it is a great album. Even if you maybe take away that little bit of, tech trickery, it's still a really good album start to finish. It didn't have to have that crazy over the top sound to it, but it absolutely works for the material as well. Entombed didn't stick, the funny thing too, I think why a lot of people gravitate towards Dismember more sometimes is they stuck to the sound more closely, whereas Entombed, of course, the second album, you already had lineup issues. And then the third album, they were already kind of starting to drift in a different direction. They didn't really stick to the sound they invented for very long. And sometimes people resent that a little bit. They want the band that keeps giving them that same endorphin shot that they want over and over. But a lot of times too, the first bands on the scene will be some of the first ones to leave the scene too, that they'll kind of stay a step ahead of things. Nicky Anderson's always been a pretty motivated guy who's on top of things. I'm not surprised he's somebody that didn't want to stick to a sound and ended up thinking like, okay, everyone else is starting to sound like us, so what should we sound like now? Let's stay a step ahead of the pack and not just get lost in the sea of bands that are doing what we tried to do, 2, 3, 4 years ago. But yeah, Left Hand Path, classic, undeniable. If folks want to go with like an Ever-Flowing Stream instead, sure, absolutely. Also a good album. This is just the one I'll take out of those two. So that's my representation for the explosion of Swedish death metal in the early 90s. And I'll get over here in the chat and see what they're thinking in terms of Entombed, Dismember, or again, lots of other good bands put stuff out in that time too. If I had to pick a favorite, it might not be either of those. I might pull something different, but that's a conversation maybe for another time. Thoughts on early 90s Swedish death metal? I'm not sure that's a scene either of you are into, but well, what do you think?
Well, since you were talking about the them staying a step ahead and sort of where they were going to go next, there's a part of me that really wanted to like, or really, I should say once, because back in the 90s, I didn't give a shit. But there's a part of me that really wants to like what Entombed did a little bit later, like with Wolverine Blues and shit. Mm-hmm. I decided to give that one a chance one day, and I was really hoping that it would sound like Lotto by Zisma, because I really like that record a lot. But it just doesn't quite have that, you know what I mean? It doesn't settle into that same sort of groove, and it just kind of, I mean, I really want to like that album. My inner contrarian at least really wants to like that album, but I'm kind of with the mass on that one. I mean, I don't think they ever surpassed Left Hand Path. So I don't know. I feel like I'm very sympathetic in principle, but in reality, it's just not there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like you want to like one of those others more, but yeah, they just kind of nail it here. I don't know. Dan, your thoughts on Entombed? Or that scene in general?
Yeah, I sort of grew up with the Nihilist demos, so I really enjoy those, of course. But as I said before, when all the Swedish death metal bands came to the album releasing stage, I sort of lost interest in death metal in 1990, which sounds like the most snobbiest thing I ever said. I think I take that back. No, but it was just exactly around that time I sort of got into that different stuff, so I sort of missed out on the album releasing part of that part of metal history. But yeah, they do everything right in that scene, of course. I have some other personal faves. Might pick up one or two more Swedish death metal thingies for tonight, but I can't argue with anyone who praises the first or even the second Entombed album. I mean, they sort of, I don't know, were they like the first death and roll band, or because I know there are a couple of other bands who did it better. I think like if you really, if you sort of like you, Aaron said that you were talking. Was it Wolverine Blues that you wanted to like?
Yeah.
Yeah. Check out. I forgot the name of it, but there's a band called Furbowl.
Oh yeah.
Furbowl. I think there's some. Was it Michael Amott? There's some ex-members from Carnage and Dismember or whatever. They made a demo, mini CD, and a full-length CD. The full-length CD with Furbowl is the greatest death and roll album ever made. It is so totally forgotten. It crushes anything that Entombed did in that scene. Yeah, Furbowl. Yeah, we have the spelling as well. Yeah, the full-length CD. It is so catchy. It's so cool. But I mean,
who else? Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Now, once I got into that, I was even further away from anything even remotely like it. But yeah, I would never piss on early Entombed, even if I'd never really listened to them that much.
Yep. Yeah, Wolverine Blues often gets cited as starting that death and roll, but I think some bands were maybe doing it a little bit earlier. The chat can help out with that, I'm sure, and let us know which bands maybe were developing that ahead of Entombed. But yeah, Entombed is probably the one that popularized it, if they weren't necessarily first in line.
You know who I really liked actually who did that? They're not Swedish, but Heretic from the Netherlands. Like Gods Over Humans, Slaves Under Satan is a fantastic record, I think.
Don't know that one. Great title.
Yeah, they made a few. They got a little bit cornier as time went on, but like, you know, there were a couple where I looked at the cover and I was like, yeah, man, I'm kind of not buying what you're selling anymore. But yeah, like their first couple like demos and that record are a lot of fun.
Indeed. All right, Dan, are you ready for another round?
Yeah, let's do another Swedish death, or maybe thrash, or death, or thrash, or death, or death, or thrash. I totally picked out this one tonight as well. The debut album of Stockholmers, Merciless.
Oh, nice.
Yep, got to talk about this one. Such a really, really cool early Swedish extreme death thrash band. For me, my introduction to Merciless was, of course, the demos, especially I'm thinking about what was the name of the demo? Was it Realm of the Dark, I think, from 89, 88 or something. One of those very well spread demos. On the demo, they sounded quite similar to, early Creator and stuff like that. Yeah, I played that demo to death and I loved it so much. And I remember when the LP came out, like 1 year later, actually on Death Like Silence production. I don't know, no one has ever heard about the really obscure Death Like Silence production label, or
do they have a license with Metal Blade?
Euronymous released this one back in the day. And I remember my first reaction when I heard the LP back then was that they're playing too fast. No, because I was so used to the demo versions of the songs that they're okay, but they're sort of overdoing it. And it took me a couple of years to get into the album again. Listening to it nowadays, I fucking love the album more than the demos. It is one of those perfect, right in between extreme thrash and early death metal. It is. I mean, if you want a definition of death thrash, and I mean like DEATHR, etc., death thrash. Merciless, The Awakening is one of those albums. It is so cool, so brutal, perfect party album. I don't know, but yeah, it does that genre perfectly. Yeah, Merciless, Minotaur, Morbid Saint, First Sadus. Yeah, it's a little family of really cool early extreme thrash bordering on death metal albums, which I always liked a lot. And yeah, this is Sweden's contribution. Yeah, always loved that album.
Good
What do you
call.
think about Merciless, guys?
Thumbs up.
Yep.
Yep. Yeah, I don't own a copy of it. It's one I just never end up picking up. But yeah, I just want to dial up online and play from time to time. So it's like, yeah, got to start looking for that again. And then I just never stumble into it.
I had so many copies through the years because it was one of those albums where you could sort of get cheap here and sell expensive or trade mostly expensive there. And eventually I had to pay out my ass for it a couple of years ago, or quite recently actually, to finally get a real first pressing copy of it. But I mean, I've had it on and off through the years, and this is final copy, so I won't get rid of it. Will not get rid of it again, even for the best of offers.
Yeah, I've done that with one or two albums before. So yeah, I'll get this back. It won't be hard to get back. And then you get it back, and like, okay, I can let it go again. Then like, oh, oops, did that one too many times.
And you realize, yep, you can actually use money instead of other records to buy records.
Yeah. When you're a little older, you might have a little more money too, you know.
Indeed. All right, Aaron.
All right. I have to think about this for a second, but I think I'm going to go with this one just because this one doesn't seem to get talked about a whole ton. But you know, Hexagon, they don't get talked about a whole lot. I don't know if they really deserve to get talked about a whole lot, but this is a fun record anyway. You know, it's about as good as the pictures. To my ears, this one sounds almost a little bit more American than a lot of the other Swedish bands. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like, you know, it's not like a cool record, because it is, but it has a little bit more of that sort of vibe than a lot. You know what I mean? It doesn't sound as I don't know. I guess it just doesn't sound as Swedish is what I'm trying to say as some of the other ones, you know. I mean, it has that vibe, and it's mostly in the songwriting too. The performance is pretty on point as far as, you know, a Euro metal type of sound. They're not the heaviest band ever, because they're not, but you know. But yeah, it's definitely sort of American influence Euro metal, but it's a fun record. Not the greatest thing ever, but my God, you see that cover. How can you resist, right? I mean, it just looks so so primitive and under the radar. You know, this is the kind of shit that people watch my channel for. So Hexagon, everybody. What do y'all think of Hexagon?
I don't remember what it sounded like. I've had that album maybe once or even twice. Mostly got it, maybe played it, and no, it wasn't as...
It's that kind of record.
Yeah, no, I can trade it with some stupid foreigner.
Yeah, like me.
Yeah, I don't remember it being crap, but I don't remember it being like too special to keep. It was usually one of those. Yeah, it's a rare Swedish record that doesn't suck, so I can probably trade it for something better. So I can't say it's crap because I don't remember what it sounded like, which is in itself sort of a pretty bad review, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. One funny fact about them, what a friend of mine told me, that I think they're from the north of Sweden, right? I don't know.
Let's take a look.
Someone told me that he sort of looked into the history of the band. The only cool band, they were actually originally called Hexagon Axe.
Really?
So if they had been called Hexagon Axe on the album, I would have kept it, because that would have been even cooler. But yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it. I don't think I've ever heard it. If I've heard it, didn't leave any long-term impression. But yeah, I've seen it. Whenever a picture of it pops up, it's like, oh, yep, there it is. But,
it's that kind of record. It's not what I'm going to say run out and grab. But if you come across it at a record show, you're not going to go wrong with it. You know, it's a fun record. You know, I mean, I guess this falls in the category we were talking earlier about records that are maybe not as much good as they are fun. That's kind of how I feel about this one. Not so much as Wages of Sin, but this one isn't as bad as Wages of Sin either. So there we go. It says recorded by, and it's in a Linköping, and produced by, and it's an address in Skellefteå.
Skellefteå, yeah, I think they were from Skellefteå. I think they're not from Linköping as far. I'm not sure. I'm not going to say anything. Sorry, but yeah, we'll see.
So,
But I'll take that recommendation. I'm going to check them out again, actually. Yeah.
If you come across it cheap, yeah, totally. You know, I'd be curious if you think they sound a little bit American too, because they don't sound American, but the writing feels more American than most Swedish bands, and I wonder if that's just me or if it's yeah. Anyway.
I'm currently wondering if Quorthon heard this album and decided he had to one up them, or I guess two up them.
Well, I think he was already doing this thing by the time this one came out.
Oh yeah, now I get one. Now I get it.
Yeah, albums named after geometric shapes.
Dude, that was really bad.
I apologize for nothing.
Yeah, that's what you have to apologize for. Is absolutely nothing.
I won't apologize for this next pick either.
Yeah, this is 88, actually. So this is a little bit late for a Swedish band. There you go.
Dated.
All right, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, it's all good. But yeah, another Swedish death metal pull. This might be the last death metal one I've got in the stack. But it's a really good one. And the band has always kind of had their own sound, even though they've changed over the years. I pulled Hypocrisy's Obscurum, I always butcher the name, Osculum Obscenum.
That's a good record.
Very good record, and one of the Swedish bands around early, but didn't really go for that typical Sunlight, Entombed, Dismembered, Carnage kind of sound quite so much. Very, very dark, very heavy, but still has good melodic strains spliced throughout it, which was always one of Hypocrisy's strong points. For a long time, I mostly stuck to the later Hypocrisy stuff, with Peter singing. But Massey's voice on this is really, really good. It's just again, just dismally dark and blackened sounding. Yeah, the song titles alone, with things like pleasure of molestation and infant sacrifices. It's just like, yeah, this isn't going to be a fun death and roll album. It's just not. But yeah, it's just very oppressively heavy, but not. It's weird because again, it's got this overbearing brutality to it, but it still has a lot of things that you can get hooked on. It's got a catchiness buried within it. It's not just a wall of blast beats or just a wall of dissonance or anything. So I really like what they did on this album. This is one that whenever I take it off the shelf and play it, I tend to play it a lot. It doesn't come out of the CD player for 5 days or so, which for me is a long time. Usually I play something once or twice. It's like, okay, you can go back to the shelf now. But this one gets a lot of spins when it comes out. And just, the fact that they kind of followed their own path in the early death metal scene. And, they reinvented themselves a bit after the lineup shake. But that material works really well, too. It's different, but, they still had, that kind of balance of very, very heavy, but could also be very melodic. And it always worked well for them. So a band that's had, a long career with a lot of great albums, but this one's really, really high up there for me. Got to like that one.
So I'm not a super big death metal guy, but when I sort of went on a death metal kick a few years ago and was revisiting all this stuff, Hypocrisy was kind of one of my favorite bands, and I probably spent more time listening to Hypocrisy than just about anyone else from Sweden, including like Entombed or whoever else. And to show that I'm not playing games, back at me. And I have this one too. Yeah, these records saw a lot of action in my house, so. It's very good stuff. And I love that they spelled the band name wrong on the spine of this one, by the way. Can you see that?
That doesn't quite show up. What's the misspelling for folks who can't see it?
It's P instead of an S at the end of Hypocrisy. There you go. You can see that. Could be SY instead of CY. They spelled it right in the logo, at least. That's more than what I normally expect from my bands. Right.
All right. Dan, we're back to you, sir.
Yeah, I think we'll see if we'll get back to some Swedish death, but I need to counter Aaron and get back to basics with some rare Swedish steel and pick one of my favorite 12 inches,
Oh
which
Jesus, this one's great. God.
yeah, which is actually great for real.
Yeah.
The Vanguard Mini. Always been one of my favorite and what I consider one of the most, as far as rare Swedish metal 12 inches from the 80s. I think this was released in 85 or 86. And this was a private release, not on any of the classic labels like Fingerprint or Sword or anything. This is a private one from central mid Sweden back in 85, I think. It's a 4-song mini album, and it's, well, what can I say? It's pure Swedish metal. Just 4 great traditional heavy metal songs, which definitely sound. You could make comparisons to Heavy Load in some sense. Heavy Load, Torch, Axewitch, and those bands. I would say I wouldn't go so far as say that they're better than Heavy Load, but they are almost on par. And I would take the Vanguard Mini over any Torch or Axewitch album, seriously, because the songs on this Mini are really killer. At least 3 out of 4 tracks on this Vanguard Mini are killers. I would say I'm especially partial to the track Beast on the Run, which has some amazing riffing in it. But if you consider yourself a fan of classic Swedish metal, like bands we talked about earlier today, Heavy Load, Gotham City, and Axewitch and the likes, this should be on your next playlist. And it has been reissued, of course, like everything else. I think it was once again.
I have a reissue.
What?
I have a reissue. I don't have a reissue.
Yeah, I think it's Cult Metal Classics once again. Yep. So much well worth getting. Really cool Swedish underground mini album. Production, vocals, playing, just great. Nothing weird or fancy or super original about the songwriting and style or anything. Just really cool. That's a really cool Swedish metal album, which I think song-wise are way over par.
It doesn't have the epic touch that like a Heavy Load or someone like that has. I wouldn't say.
No, but it has.
It's
has
not black.
No, but it has the same punch and energy as the rockier metal songs, I think.
So, chat, if you're at that record show and you see the Hexagon record and you're thinking, oh, well, the Metal Theologian said if I got this one, I wouldn't be disappointed, but I can only afford this one or the Vanguard record, you should go for the Vanguard record. And would you mind holding that up for one more second? Okay, so chat, let's all just like make our peace right now with the fact that kind of looks like an AOR record. Okay, it's not. It's really fucking good. Okay, so if you look at the Hexagon and you're going, this looks like a real metal record, and this one looks kind of AOR, that's the record to go for. It really is.
I would say this is heavier and more metal than Hexagon.
Yeah. I can't. I was gonna say I can't deny the obvious. Let me say I can only go so far in denying the obvious. I can deny it to a point. But yeah, Vanguard rules, and the reissue, I mean, I think I paid $25-$30 for my copy. So you can spend $200 on an original if you want, but you can get a reissue without too much effort.
It's about that price, I think.
Good deal. All right. Aaron, what is something else you would recommend to folks to check out?
Shit, is it really me? Wait, something I'd recommend or something I want to show?
Both.
Wow, that's a distinction.
Okay, you know something? Here's where we're going to go. All right, this one's kind of a semi-clunker that I'm about to show here. But I do love this record anyway. The mystery of this record, why the hell were there Jesus metal bands in Sweden to the degree that there were? like, I mean, I think I heard somewhere that like these guys basically got a record out because one of the guys in the band's family had money. So like he basically, oh, it's three brothers, it looks like. So it was probably all their parents who had money. But you know, this is a fun record. It's fun songs. It's, you know, not like gonna rip your face off, but it will amuse you and entertain you. But what's up? So this is a serious question. There seem to be a lot of Jesus bands from Sweden, and like a lot of Jesus bands from Southern California. That makes sense. That's where I mean, especially like Orange County was like, you know, infamous through the 70s and the 80s for being a hotbed of like, you know, evangelicalism. So they had Colorado Springs and, you know, obviously most of the South, right?
Yeah.
But like Sweden is not a religious country compared to the US. Like I remember reading something once where they were talking about the Bible Belt in Sweden, and like in the Bible Belt, it was like 15% religious or something like that, you know, as opposed to like 80% here or something like that. So what is up with the Christian bands from Sweden? Is there like I don't know, some sort of subculture there where these guys financing records or something? But you had Jerusalem, you had Leviticus. I mean, there are a lot of Jesus bands from a, you know, disproportionately relative to the population, I think.
Well, yeah, you're right. Where we luckily live in one of the most secular countries in the world, so where atheism is normal and Christians are weird. And oh, Christian, huh? Interesting,
right? But I can think of any Christian bands from Germany.
Yeah, no, but I think I don't think we have a disproportional amount of Christian bands, but I mean, I think these bands had a lot of support from the churches and the organizations, because the funny thing is about Sweden and religion is we have a state church. We have no separation of church and state. We have a state church, which is very ironic if you compare it to the US. So, I mean, there were obviously, I think there were sort of, I don't know, this is pure speculation from my part, but I would imagine that once the sort of hard rock scene started, or rock scene started exploding in the 70s and 80s, that the Christian communities, if you had like one rock band that started spreading the gospel, they might have gotten a lot of support from the local church group, and eventually promoted them to release albums. But percentage wise, there's not a lot of them, but yeah, there are a few, of course, Swedish bands, Swedish white metal bands, and it's funny when you look at, once again talking about fanzines, but you look at old white metal fanzines from the 80s. There's US bands and Swedish bands. There's a bunch of US bands, and then there's like Jerusalem, Leviticus, and Charisma, and a few others. So yeah, maybe you're right that Sweden was sort of like,
it's all US and Sweden.
Yeah, that is weird. Funny thing
about, none from France. There are none from Italy.
From Italy, like fucking Satanists. Everyone is Satanist from Italy. Yeah. Well, technically, Paul Shane is a Christian band, so yeah.
Okay.
No, but that Charisma album, that Charisma album, I actually reviewed it. It was one of my oldest reviews I made.
I think I bought it because of your review.
I'm so sorry. Please forgive me.
Dude, I kind of love it.
No, but I reviewed it for the metal, not the metal page, Metal Treasures, like 20 years ago or something like that. And it was mainly because it was a weird album I never seen before. I picked it up cheap in Stockholm, and like, might as well. I can't only write about really great albums. I got to write about something weird as well. But there actually are two great songs on it, which you could sort of make into a 7-inch. I think I think the first track. What's the name of the first track? What?
The Nights.
Yeah, I remember that one being great. And then there's also like a rockier track. Maybe the first one on side B.
Let's rock and roll.
There are two actually good tracks on it, so it could have been a great 7-inch. As an album, it's the usual wimpy white hard rock style.
Yeah.
But those two, the Knights track definitely is a really good one. So that's worth checking out. It's a surprisingly cool first wave Swedish heavy metal track.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about being easily amused, and I also am of the school of it's not like it's written anywhere that you have to like all your records, but yeah, I mean, I was gonna say I'm not gonna shit on Charisma. Actually, I'm happy to shit on Charisma, but I'm also happy to listen to it. So, you know, it's kind of one of those. I've got a lot of those.
Yeah, interesting. I hadn't really thought about it, how many Christian bands were there and that it was unusual. So very cool.
The only country where I can even think of a couple that I could name is Russia.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there were quite a few, actually, from Russia.
But that's like a whole different thing. That was like later, you know, and you could see that being sort of a response to you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like the U.S., it isn't a shocker because it's just that kind of a culture. Because I think to a certain degree, it's because we don't have a state church. So the churches have to market themselves. Yeah. So it's like capitalist religion, sort of. You know, you have to the ones who outcompete the others are the ones who are able to sort of, you know, promote themselves the best, and that sort of trickles into everything else. But
when you say the churches have to market themselves, it makes me flash back on Dogma and the Buddy Christ.
Oh, one of my favorite movies. I love that movie. Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, I haven't seen it in a long time, but as soon as Aaron said that, all I could see was the whole kind of thing. So yeah, that and the Postmaster General. Now I'm just not going to sleep tonight. Good deal.
Yeah, I think that was before we went live. Everyone, we were talking about the Postmaster General, and we were talking about what West Texas has in common with Northern Sweden.
Yes.
If you're wondering.
And of course, Postmaster General quickly got rolled into like a new wave of British heavy metal band context, and now it's stuck in my head and won't go away. I knew it would happen. All right, let's try to replace it with another thing here.
Before I pull out another shitty one.
Well, this one's not particularly good, but I have a reason for pulling it. Sweden had a band called Wolf, like just about every other country that exists. I was never nuts about this band. They're decent at times, not always. But the reason I wanted to pull them was to point out that Sweden kind of helped lead the way back to a lot of traditional heavy metal getting love in the late 90s and early 2000s. Most of the 90s, of course, in many territories, it was all about the extreme metal, death metal, then black metal, and then whatever other styles. For a lot of the 90s, in many places, not everywhere, a lot of the older traditional stuff from the 80s started to just kind of get forgotten and collect dust. But then you did start to have, some bands revive that. These days, of course, it's a big thing. It's got its own subgenre with new wave of traditional heavy metal and such. Wolf was one of those bands that kind of predates that tag, but they very much had that kind of sound. They were very much harkening back to stuff from the 80s, even, just, the logo of the band, some of the covers, being very simple. They looked like things that could have come out in 1983 or 1984. And they were distributed and circulated well enough that they did generate a lot of chatter on different, message boards and forums there, again, like very late 90s or earliest 2000s. The band made a little bit of a splash. No, they weren't going on tour with Metallica or anything, but people heard it and it really did click because a lot of folks still, of course, liked that style of metal from the 80s. And they hadn't been hearing a lot of it unless they had, dug around. You just didn't come across a lot of it there for roughly a 10-year period. So yeah, Sweden's Wolf was, one of those handful of bands that really kind of started getting the gears turning on this particular style of metal once again. And Wolf did okay for themselves, but the movement that Wolf, and other bands. Portrait, Enforcer, all kind of, gradually got, this, now gigantic scene of new wave of traditional heavy metal bands going. So even though Wolf's not a personal favorite, I thought it was an important thing to point out in terms of Sweden's heavy metal history, that it wasn't all just black and death metal at the turn of the century. Some bands did kind of help spearhead a return to the more traditional classic sound. So good for Wolf. Music's maybe like a C plus, but good on them for getting people interested in helping promote that sound again.
Yeah, I maintain that, even though I really only collect, earlier or 80s into the early 90s metal, I still maintain that right now is probably the best time to be into metal since after the 80s. Like, the 80s is the best time. This is the second best time as far as metal's history, because there's just so much and so many great bands coming out of, nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's an interesting take, Aaron. And yeah, I mean, between all the good new stuff that comes out, and like Dan was saying earlier too, with the pretty reasonable availability of a lot of older stuff being reissued for good prices, that's a good combination for sure. Yeah. All right, fellas, it is getting a bit later. Dan, you want to do 2 more rounds? How are you holding up in particular?
Can I have 5 more rounds?
If you want, you can have 5 more. Aaron, are you okay for 5 rounds?
No, I don't know. We'll see.
Dan, the other thing that I do sometimes when Alan's like, "Oh, let's do 1 more round or 2 more rounds," and I have 5 more, is I'll just cheat and put a couple in at once. So
yeah.
Just we can do a handful more. Again, it's got to be pushing like about 6 a.m. where you're at. So trying not to kill you here.
We've gone later than that before. Well, I do 2 bands in a row then.
Sure.
Yeah, Wolf were very popular actually around their time, which was like 10, 20 years ago. I don't know. Yeah, they were very popular in Sweden actually. I remember everybody likes them basically. I for some reason never even heard them that much. I can't even make an informed opinion about them really. But I mean, the little I heard, I didn't hate. So yeah. But as far as the 2000s and the resurgence of Swedish steel, to my mind, there were sort of like 3 bands who sort of spearheaded the return of Swedish metal, which was like Forcer, In Solitude, and my all-time favorite from that era, Helvetets Port.
Yep.
And I would have so much liked that they would have held up their brand new album, which came out this week. It wasn't available. I was trying to get a copy of it. I couldn't find it this week, maybe next week. Helvetet Port, The Gates of Hell, were a Swedish metal band, which, if you look at this picture and I mean the lineup picture, and they look, I mean, corny, retro, blah blah blah.
My heart feels warm.
Yeah. And this is sort of a divisive band. I think a lot of people, I'm almost imagining that people haven't even bothered listening to them because they have sort of a preconception about them being this really cliched and corny retro band. Well, maybe corny, maybe, I don't know. Retro, yeah, sure. But for me, Helvetes Port are also one of the most original old school metal bands in the last 2 decades, I think. They are very much influenced by old Swedish Swedish metal, or first wave of heavy metal, but their approach to it and their songwriting is still totally original and unique. They have this sort of a bit weird and skewed way in the way they sort of put together their songs. They have a quirkiness to them, which I haven't heard anything similar in any other sort of like new wave of traditional heavy metal bands in the last 10, 15 years. the songwriting and the song constructions are quirky and clever in a way that doesn't sound like any other band in this genre. And the tracks, at least, I mean, on this debut album, it is not a weak track on the whole album. I think it's absolutely great. They also have a couple of, like, they sing in Swedish on a couple of tracks, which works out great for me. I don't know about you guys, but yeah, sound, they do, you can really tell the influence from Gotham City and the Heavy Load and stuff like that, but they do not sound like a copycat retro blah blah band at all. I think they are probably one of the most unique and original old school. I hate using the word retro because this comes more from just love of a particular sound.
I hate it too. I'm totally with you.
Yeah,
100%.
no, this is so it comes so much from the heart. It is so original, and Helvetesport sound like no other band. I mean, I can only think of the only other comparison would be something like, you know, Realm Builder from the US or something like that, which is sort of like old school but totally unique. They don't sound the least bit common style wise, but it had sort of like the same vibe. But these guys are more Gotham City, Heavy Load, Zone Zero, and all these obscure bands. But it's almost like some of the songs are almost like progressive metal, but unintentionally. You know, with some really weird time changes and weird riffing thrown in and everything. But it's sort of like they stumbled upon, oh, we had to squeeze in this riff. Oh, no, wait, let's do that drum fill before we go to the chorus or whatever. And it's, I mean, great starter if you want to check out Helvetesport. Backtrack to the track Lightning Rod Avenger, and especially the promo video. Just go out on YouTube and Helvetesport, or just Google Lightning Rod Avenger, and you'll get to the video. And it's such an epic track. It's not on this album. It was an EP released after this one, but yeah, always love this band. One of Sweden's finest in the last few decades.
That record's like 20 years old now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Probably so, yeah.
Okay.
Very cool. Yeah, one of the guys from the band left a comment on one of my other videos maybe a month or so ago.
I bet.
Yeah, and I had just seen like the week before. It's like, oh, they've got a new album out. I should check that out. And he said the reaction to it's been really good so far. He's been really happy with how folks are enjoying it.
Yeah.
So yeah, very cool pick, Dan. Let's see. Did you want to do one more, Dan? Or
yeah, well, I can do just
sure,
other even newer bands. Speaking of new bands, the two new ones for tonight. I'm gonna hype a Stockholm band, which like blew me away like last year or whenever I heard them the first time. It's a band called Tyrann. These guys have a history. I think some of the guys come from Enforcer, and they sort of overlap with this Terminal project, which was sort of like a Swedish spoof on East Euro metal. The band Tyrann are sort of like a salute to old Swedish demo 7-inch local compilation 1-track bands, but not done in the least bit of in a corny way. This is so bloody cocky, and it's catchy, and it's sing-along, and it's simple, almost in a punky way. I wouldn't say that they sound like a punk band or anything, but they had this is an amazing live band. They played at Keep It True this spring. I think they only played live like 4 or 5 times. They've really carefully chosen their spots for playing live. And they played down in some Greek festival as well. And all the hype for this band is so well deserved. Both albums or mini albums, whatever you call it. There's like 4-song albums. I think some of these versions are on 45. I couldn't really pick a favorite from them, but I mean, Besatt or Djävulens musik. Most of the lyrics are in Swedish. I can't. I don't think it would be a problem because they do it with such spirit and energy, and I would totally get into this if they sung in Indonesian or Czechoslovakian or whatever. It is not language dependent in that way. It is. I would say today the absolute one of 2 or 3 best new Swedish bands today. An absolute must if you're into really like early new wave of heavy metal or hard rock, and the lyrics are amazing. Unfortunately, you need Google Translate for most of them, but it's I mean, the lyrics are mostly about heavy metal being the music of the devil, and we all love it to death. No, it is such a cool band. It's stupid simple. They managed to make stupid simple hard rock in a new, unique and engaging way. One of Sweden's finest bands today. Tyrann.
Very cool. Yeah, don't know that one at all.
Check them out.
Awesome.
All
yeah,
right.
I don't know either. I've seen on lists. Actually, when those reissues, when those were coming out, I remember seeing them in the mailing list from one of those Greek labels that spams me every day.
Yeah.
But that's all I know. All right. Oh, what the hell? This is a little bit wimpier than it looks, but what a great cover. Vizcaya. I mean, I'm not sure what that guy's riding, but I'm on board. I'll tell you, though, this is another record that I was sort of waiting to see if it would click. I've had this record for more than 20 years. And every time I put it on, I was like, it's a little bit wimpier than I wish it were. But I think it just clicked earlier today, actually, when I put this on. Like the first song, Howl in the Sky, is really good. But after that, it kind of peters out a little bit. I mean, it actually kind of declines. But like the level it was declining to wasn't too low for me this time, which might mean my standards are lower than they were 20 years ago. I like to think my taste is better than it was 20 years ago. But I think this record has finally clicked for me. And do I recommend it? Listen to it online first. But I'm showing it because it's a funny cover. So there we go. And look at this guy and his fucking keyboards. I mean, Jesus. I don't know if he's in the same band or not, but probably if that's the guy singing. But, you know. It's not quite as wimpy as it looks from that standpoint, you know. It's somewhere between this and this. So, there we go.
It's sort of 70s sounding, isn't it? I don't remember what it sounded like. It's one of those records, one of those few Swedish hard rock records that you still come across quite often here in Stockholm. I haven't listened to it in decades, but as far as I remember it, it's sort of Hammond keyboard infused 70s style hard rock.
Kind of, but you know, it's another one of those where I was expecting to sound kind of hard rocky. When I put it on earlier today, I was like, oh, this is actually more sort of metallic than I was expecting it to be, you know. So yeah, I don't want to like oversell how much it is, how heavy it is, because it's really, there are parts of it that I think are heavy in intent, and then parts that are kind of not so heavy in intent, and they're hitting it where they want to in each case. But yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I feel like I've come around on it, but it's not. It's not that expensive. I mean, and with that one, I actually know, because that's one that every few years I think about selling, and every time I go and look and see what it's going for, it's still about the same as what it was when I got it. So it was about a $40 record over here 20 years ago, and it still is. Maybe it's gone up in the last 5 years, but you know,
it's one of those. It is absolutely beautiful, but it's one of those that's not particularly rare.
Yeah,
tends to turn up quite a lot, at least here in Stockholm.
it's not one that the Allens of the world are hunting for and driving the price of up.
No, not bad. I have heard it, and yeah, it's okay. Haven't heard it in a long time, but no, it's not one I'm driven to hunt down an OG copy of.
You know, it's funny. I pulled out all these mediocre albums, but but people have mentioned a bunch of bands in the chat that I completely spaced when it comes to pulling them out. Like the Torch records, I could have pulled out. Someone said Mindless Sinner before. The Mindless Sinner record is probably a lot better than that Biscaya record, but I didn't think of it, so it's on the shelf.
Yep, yeah, I forgot Mindless Sinner as well.
That was another band that took me a while to come around on too. The first couple of times I heard it, I was like, "What the hell is this?" But then I put it on one day, I was like, "Oh, holy shit! It's actually awesome. That's what it is." So,
good deal. All right, let's see. One big album I absolutely must mention. There's a handful of them I'll try to still get in, but this one first because it's pretty amazing. Going back to Sweden's black metal scene, Dissection with the Somber Lane. If Marduk just kind of defined the very aggressive side of Swedish black metal that bands like Dark Funeral and stuff would follow suit on, Dissection helped define that more melodic side of Swedish black metal. And people kind of go back and forth on this one. Is it black and death metal or deathly black metal or melodic black metal? To me, it's always has been a black metal album, with the given vocal style and stuff. It just never, I never felt like it fits into the death metal category particularly well. I know Marty and other folks, will take issue with that, but regardless, the band had, an amazingly good sound. And again, other bands kind of followed suit in this direction, and some of them were quite good, like Sacramentum and such. We don't have time tonight to pull out all the bands that did it. I wanted to pull out one good representation of this strain of Swedish black metal from the 90s, and the Somber Lane's an excellent example. I always forget that this album came out as early as 93. Even sitting here putting records together tonight, I'm thinking like, okay, Somber Lane's what, 95? Like, no, it's earlier than that. The fact that they put out an album this good, this mature sounding that early, not just in their career, but really as black metal was finding its footing and really becoming a force, is just astonishing. And of course, the one they followed it up with is pretty good too, I hear. But I figured I'd go with their debut for tonight's showing. Like this style of Swedish black metal quite a bit. I'll usually listen to this stuff more than the Dark Funeral and Marduk stuff. Both are fine. I just tend to be most of the time I'm more likely to be in the mood for a Dissection style band. There's been a lot of Dissection kind of clone bands popping up more and more in recent years, and some of them do it quite well. Dissection, of course, is always going to be special, I guess in part because they only had those two early albums. Yes, there's a later album. We're not going to talk about that one. But yeah, for the first two, really hard to beat that for that particular style of Swedish black metal. Yeah, I'll keep that one short and to the point.
Dissection. I'm starting to think, trying to count how many friends here in Sweden I know, metal friends, who don't worship Dissection, and they're very few. Yeah, they're an immensely cultified and popular band for good reason, of course. When they started, I mean, they did like a demo and a 7-inch, which was sort of like slightly more in the traditional Swedish death metal style, and then they released the Somber Lane demo, which I sort of picked up. And when I heard that, it was so different from anything I've heard from back then. This is like they have like Iron Maiden harmonies, but they're doing black death metal. It was so weird. Yep. It was, actually, I mean, there were Norwegian bands playing around with those type of harmonies, but doing it so explicitly, like Dissection, I can see why they sort of, for a short while, or maybe still to this they conquered the world with that sound and became so influential. Such a cool band. Once again, for like a lot of these bands from this era of metal history, I sort of zoned out from metal in general right before they actually started releasing albums, blah blah blah. I've told the story many times before, but I'm probably eventually going to pick up the albums as well. But yeah, amazing songs. At least, I mean, the first album I'm familiar with most of the songs, and they are amazing. So I guess the hype is quite well reserved with that band.
Mm-hmm. Would have to agree, absolutely. Let's see. All right, let's see what else Dan still has in his stack.
Yeah, I still have a little bit of everything. Should we go with? I mean, we need to talk a little bit more about first wave of Swedish heavy metal, right?
Probably,
Yes.
yeah. I've still got at least one. I've got a. Yep,
Yeah,
one.
I have a finishing punch, but I'm gonna do this first. Remember the band Zone Zero?
Mm-hmm. I've heard that one.
I've heard that
on Pang Records. This is 100% that sort of 1982 Swedish explosion of quality metal. This sleeve, I love the sort of light gray on dark gray background, hand-drawn logo, and it just says heavy metal Zone Zero. It is. If you take it out of the plastic, it does it more justice. And then a live shot. And they released, well, a whole bunch of demos. This 7-inch in '82, and eventually everything got reissued on CD. I think it actually was once again Jordan at Stormspell released a CD of their demos, but then Cult Metal Classics did it as well. So there is a double LP worth of material with this band, and I know exactly what you're thinking. Band releases 1 7-inch, then makes double LP reissue. This pattern, maybe we're familiar with this. That's the double LP reissue of the one single band have disappointed us in the past. But not in this case, because this band had an amazing legacy of so many cool demo tracks. So this is one of those double LP reissues, which is so well worth getting. I guess it would be easier to find any of the CD versions. Even the older one from like 10, 15 years ago, and the new one might be easier to find than a vinyl. But the demo material of Zone Zero is so well worth getting. This is Swedish heavy metal, I would say once again, somewhere in between Heavy Load and Gotham City, but with their own sound. They're sort of like epic, punchy, catchy. This, I would say this is on par with, I think I like Zone Zero more than Heavy Load. Sorry, I said it. Shoot me. Are they better than Gotham City? Not quite, but they're right under there. But they are totally in the same league. If I'm going to pick like one band in the same league as the most classic Swedish metal bands, and this and the other bands I mentioned, of course, leaves bands like Torch, Axewitch, Final Sinner, all those bands are great as well, but Zone Zero leaves them in the dust as far as killer metal tracks goes. And the 7-inch, yes, both tracks rip. The A side is like early epic metal. It could be an early Manowar track, Win or Die. It is so heavy, so epic. But the demo tracks, there's so many killers on it. So Zone Zero, one of Sweden's finest as far as early heavy metal legacy goes. So one of the starter bands if you're going to check out the early underground Swedish metal scene. You like Zone Zero, guys?
Yeah.
I've
I
never
know.
heard
I know the single. I have not heard any of the demo stuff. But yeah, the single's always been one of those. It's kind of got the classic first wave sound. So,
Do you have it, Alan?
no, I don't have the single. That's one I
okay.
do not have.
I thought you were sort of being modest around the edges there.
Nope, don't have that one. So I've got it either from Dan or somebody. I tape trading, CDR trading years ago. So cool single, but yeah, I didn't know they had that much demo stuff or that it was that good. So I've written it down on the shopping list. Wife's not going to be happy.
Shop it.
Let's see, Dan, did you want to show another one this round or?
Yeah, well, should I do another single? I was thinking about saving this for last, but I have something else fun to save for last as well, I guess.
Well, either way,
I can do another single because it's important that we talk about it.
You should go. You save your final punch for after I go for the last time, because I don't have any more great ones. I have a couple more to show, but we need like a better punch than.
I'm going to save the punch because I have a pretty cool punch actually.
Awesome.
I think I know what you're saving. I'll be surprised if it's not.
Yeah. So no, go ahead, you guys.
All right. So, Aaron.
All right. So I'll show another shitty one.
Yeah. more shitty Swedish metal.
Yeah. I like the shitty records too. So. Oh, you know something? Here we go. I'll do a quick two for here. I was thinking about skipping over this one, but this is a really good record. It's kind of speedy, kind of quick. I mean, not the most memorable record ever, but I was not disappointed when I got this thing. It's a little bit late. It's like 89 or something like that. It's a cool record. The other one that I was thinking about showing was this one, which is definitely kind of heavy on the cheese ball shit. But the songs are good. You know what I mean? If you can handle another record with a title like Gypsy Queen, you could probably handle this record okay. So, just a couple little more shout outs, a couple of lesser known bands that I don't have a whole ton to say about, honestly, but that's something here to show. Huh?
No, the blacksmith one is actually one of the better ones you picked out. No, it's really good. I think I forgot.
I mean, it's definitely kind of melodic metal, you know what I mean?
I have it like literally.
Does that one
it's have kind of like epic metal that we all
front of my bag? So yeah, the song "I Don't Know," that is a true hit. The song "I Don't Know," the first song on the B-side, it is so great. One of those. If you want to make a mixtape of old Swedish metal stuff, I Don't Know with a blacksmith, do check it out. And that mini is great. Actually, it's one of those really great Swedish minis.
I like it.
Yeah, it's good.
Does it have like a really heavy keyboard sound to it, or am I thinking of something else?
Yeah, no, it does. But some of the songs are quite speedy. I would say it is melodic metal.
Yeah.
So no, this is quality stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I remember liking it. I remember having a really pronounced. The keyboards are kind of up front on it, but they're decent. They're not like really bad wimpy ones.
This is another one I would have hated back in the 80s, but right now I kind of love it. So yeah, I mean, I did pull it out because I like it.
I wouldn't. Does not.
I didn't expect you to like it so much, though, Dan. Honestly.
No. This does not fall in the cheesy category at all. I think. No, it's keyboard oriented, but there's a good tempo to it, and especially, that's excellent track. I don't know. It is so cool.
Yeah. All right, cool. What do you think of the Metal Mercy one?
I remember it as being, isn't it like sort of like Metallica-ish, basically, like power thrash, basically.
Yeah, kind of. Like
not the word
on there, but yeah,
but it's very typical 1989 power thrash. With chugging, it's good. I mean, the scene was so oversaturated back then with those type of Metallica wannabe bands. So I'm not sure it stood out that particularly much, but it's not bad. And
No,
I
but
mean,
89 is better than I expected for just that reason.
maybe it's even better than I remembered. I haven't put it on in a long time, but it looks
I like the
cool. I'm
black
thinking
better.
one of those classic Greek labels, not Cult Metal Classics, the other one. They stole the logo for their label logo, I think.
Oh,
The other Greek
Steel Gallery.
Or was it? No, maybe it actually is Cult Metal Classics, but in the early days they had that as a logo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Some cool ones from Aaron. Let's see what I've got left here. Going to touch on a couple more sort of bigger bands. Make sure that they get their moment on the Swedish show for sure. Fantastic album that I've always loved. Catatonia's debut, Dance of December Souls. Another band that just had a pretty unique sound for their time, and they didn't stick with it at all. So that's one thing that's always made this album pretty special for me, is that while I like the next couple of albums quite a bit, they all sound a little bit different. This one's got such it's kind of a gloomy atmosphere in a dreary sense, but it's not especially dark most of the time. It's not like it's suicidal depressive Swedish metal or something. It just it has this much more dreamy atmosphere to it. The vocals are still quite insane. The legend has always been that yes, he messed up his vocal cords so much that he couldn't sing in this style anymore. They basically had to change styles. He doesn't even sing on the second album. So it took a while to get back together. Back cover's always been interesting. This, I think, the cover art really fits the mood of the music. And then you turn around, it's just like, okay, that's going on too. But this is one of those albums I feel like I should play it more than I do. And I still do take it out on a regular basis. But Catatonia had a very cool original sound in their early days. As they got more and more streamlined over the years, I just kind of lost interest. That material didn't do as much for me. But the first few albums are great. Another band that changed styles a lot, I think Rick mentioned this one in the chat earlier, Therion. Now they started off very much in the Swedish death metal end of the spectrum, and around this they were obviously drifting in other directions and trying different things. This album was kind of their risky one, where they really went out on a limb, but it absolutely worked for them. And they, of course, turned into a much more symphonic band over time. I thought this was a really cool album when it came out. I don't play it a ton anymore. I still enjoy it when I do. It just doesn't come off the shelf all that often. It's one of the best examples of horrible late 90s, wants to be CGI, but it feels like an insult to even call it CGI artwork.
It's kind of awesome, though.
It's awesome in that it's like looking back, for us kids, when we were kids in the 80s, and you look back and realize wow, we really did wear clothes like that. You look back at these 90s albums, and it's like, wow, we really did make covers that looked like that. But Therion often, they don't get discussed a huge amount. I think the albums quickly started to become very, very samey after the first couple. And not a band I hear folks bring up very often anymore. But they found their niche, pretty unique. Other bands do symphonic metal, but not many bands do it the way Therion does, which I can still appreciate, even if I don't check them out all that often. But two of the bigger named acts we hadn't mentioned tonight, so wanted to make sure both of those got included here for sure.
It's a good cover, but doesn't quite give me that special feeling the way a cover like this does.
No, not whatsoever. not at all.
I mean, this just oozes quality.
That like you said, Aaron, that one gets your spidey sense tingling. This one, nothing tingles when you look at this.
Yeah, that one did not make my spidey sense tingle. I mean, I remember seeing that around specifically, and it not making my spidey sense tingle.
I didn't know. No, I would not have bought that album without, and if I hadn't already heard some of it. I don't know if I got it. I probably tape trading it first, and then it's like, oh yeah, I'll get it. And I remember looking at it just like, well, I'm I'm glad I know the music's going to be good here. But all right, when
you mentioned the Therion, I have sort of like the album Vovin is sort of like my secret shame. I have some good memories of that album. It has a special place in my heart. The one, I think it's the album after the one you showed, Alan.
Vovin.
Vovin, yeah.
Yeah, I like that album a lot too.
Yeah, that from that era, that's my favorite from them. And it's a very typical 90s release. But I have some. It's sort of my secret love for that one. Let's do 2 Swedish doom bands we haven't talked about yet.
All right.
Because we haven't we talked maybe, but we have to, of course, do some extra talk about Mercy.
Sure.
Because of course, no, there's no pictures of him, but we have Messiah Markolin on this one. He actually sang on the album before this one as well, but this was the first doom metal album of Mercy. They started out with this record, the Swedish Metal, in '81. Probably the worst album I ever got a T-shirt of, but it looks nice, especially for tonight. And then they made a full-length, self-titled, traditional heavy metal album. Quite all right. But then we got Witchburner, which is sort of... They sound more Saint Vitus, actually, than they sound Candlemass. Definitely. This is
fair.
Sort of like Saint Vitus with Messiah Markolin on vocals. So if you, for some reason, like doom metal, like Candlemass and Saint Vitus, but missed out on Mercy, you need this one. It is really great. Witchburner. I do want to give some extra love to the album they recorded after Witchburner.
King Doom?
No. King Doom was the one released in '88. But in '87, they recorded Victory March, which was much better, with a much better vocalist as well. And once again, we have to thank Niklas, who released the Swedish Knights compilation. He also released Victory March with Mercy. Like, was it 10? No, this was actually even before. This was in 2002. I think that there are newer reissues of this one as well. This is the second best Mercy album, and it's really underrated. And it's much better than King Doom. King Doom is okay. My problem with King Doom is the vocalist. I think the too high vocals doesn't really fit the Doom style. The guy who sings here, whose name I... Anders Strengberg, way better fitting for Mercy's doom metal sound. So this is a really cool, underrated Swedish doom album from 1987 that didn't see the light of day until 2002. Victory March. Do check it out. And so that was Doom band number 1, and we mentioned them before. Once again, I've been using the word underrated a lot, but another one of the most underrated Swedish hard rock and heavy metal albums ever is the Stillborn debut album. This is doom metal, all right, but it's also this came out in, I think, '89, and it is for goth inspired metal or hard rock album, this sound the least goth metal. This is goth inspired hard rock metal doom, which doesn't sound the least bit like goth metal. This is doom metal with what's his name from Sisters of Mercy on vocals, basically. Doom metal, gothy doom metal with lots of testosterone and hair on its chest. This is so cocky and ballsy and still totally bloody epic at times. And at the same time being sort of like in a dark, death rocky, Danzig, Samhain vibe to it. But this is metal and hard rock to the bone. And some of the tracks on this album rivals prime era Candlemass in epicness as well. Yeah, it's a very eclectic album. It opens up with the track Nuke 'Em All, with sort of like a dark boogie rock track, which isn't that special. But then you have a trilogy of masterpieces: Flesh for Jesus, Albino Flogged in Black, and I the Stillborn, which are amazing doom metal anthems. And I think the track Albino Flogged in Black, if anyone thinks that one sounds familiar, it's because both Paradise Lost and Entombed made covers of this song. And it is not the best song on the album. It is one of the best ones, but not the best one. But this, it is such a cool Swedish masterpiece. Really dark, evil, total macho doom goth metal. I mean, I don't know how else to explain it. It is dirty, heavy, rocking, and epic in all the best ways. Stillborn, great album.
That's a fantastic fucking record.
Yep.
If you tell someone that's if you call that a doom record, that's sort of like if you say Dimension Hatred is a thrash record.
Yeah,
it's like point. Yeah, it is, but that doesn't really tell the whole story.
No.
I do not know that one, but I'm going to check it out because it sounds pretty cool.
You should check it out. And actually, I got a reissue of that relatively cheap. I mean, I got it a few years ago, so I don't know now what's happened. But I mean, I paid like $20 for this. I'm actually going to pull it out right now so I can play it. That is an awesome record, though, and it's a really unique record, a really special record. You don't have to wait for me, though.
Aaron's going to get it spinning right off the bat.
There it is. Yep. It's going right there. And this is like, I don't see right on. Looks like Bengan's Vinyl Club.
Yeah, Bengan's Vinyl Club. Yeah, it's a Swedish reissue.
Yeah, but I got this maybe 5 years ago, something like that. It's a fantastic record. And I mean, honestly, this is the sort of record where you listen to it and you go, why the hell haven't I heard of this before? Because it's really, yeah.
Yeah, they sort of rode on the coattails of Candlemass back then, because I remember that, I mean, Candlemass were quite popular actually in Sweden in the late 80s. I mean, a lot of bands loved them. And sort of most of my friends or people who were really into that also picked up the first Stillborn album. And they made two other albums with different vocalists, which weren't as, I think the second one was okay. They had some similar traits, but different vocalists, more like a traditional good vocalist. And then the third one was crap, as far as I remember.
Yeah, I have another one of their records I actually bought by accident, and I didn't think it was bad at all.
Yeah, I think the second one is okay. I forgot which one is which.
Oh, don't know the band, but we'll definitely have to check them out.
Yeah.
Let's see. Aaron, what have you still got that you'd like to show?
I don't have anything to follow Stillborn with. Do you have another? Was that the punch, or is there another punch coming?
No, I have a good punch.
Okay.
What about you?
That's, I mean, seriously, that would be a really good record to end on. That fucking thing. Let me see if I have anything else here. I mean, oh shit! What the hell, man? This is an easy one, but I love this record, man.
Oh,
we're talking about all this obscure stuff, but don't snooze on Overdrive, because
absolutely.
Yeah. And this is one band where they're super rare, like first EP isn't anywhere near as good as their relatively common subsequent records.
Yep.
Like Metal Attack is very good. I think this one is fantastic. And, you know, that first EP, I mean, I have a reissue of it, but it's kind of, you know, it's not bad. You know, I could pull it out and listen to it right now and be like, yeah, this is good, you know, but it's not like this. No. So there we go. We're ending with a good one over here.
Yeah, the band of Janne Stark, who we have to thank for, well, the Swedish metal encyclopedias and a lot of these Swedish reissues, which has come out on Cult Metal Classics recently, because he had a big part in hunting down these bands and convincing them to release their stuff again. So it's because of Janne, who played in Overdrive.
Well, one thing about Janne Stark is he could have delivered us a mustache like that, but he chose not to. I'm a little disappointed in him for that. No, I'm just kidding. That's I didn't know about that connection, so that's interesting.
Very cool. Yeah, good band. Yeah, a staple for early Swedish metal for sure. Let's see, a couple more big bands that should get a shout out here. So I'll end with some obvious stuff too. And again, we could do entire episodes on some of these bands. We're not trying to gloss over them at all, but again, we're casting a wide net tonight. Sweden within their death metal, has had very solid progressive strains. It's not all HM2 pedals, as attested with Dan Swano's stuff. Edge of Sanity has always been a very popular one that did a lot of cool stuff, and a lot of these got reissued. I don't know if all the albums did, but there's been reissues this year, because I know some of them had gotten hard to find and a little expensive. So if you were looking to round out your Edge of Sanity collection, now's a good time to do so very affordably. And it didn't take long for this project, to get a lot more experimental. Crimson's not my favorite, but just a good example of Swedes taking death metal into different directions, incorporating some more psychedelic long form influences. And of course, the band that probably exemplifies that the best would have to be Opeth. Again, yes, we could spend hours on Opeth. I couldn't spend hours on Opeth. This isn't necessarily my favorite band, but they absolutely deserve mention as one of the big, probably maybe the biggest band to come out of Sweden since the mid 90s. Maybe. Prove me wrong. Not sure. When I do listen to Opeth, I tend to like, the first few albums. This set suits me really well because it's the Candlelight stuff. These are pretty good. And of course, Opeth, drifted out of heavy metal for a while. Maybe they've drifted back in. I'm not even sure where they stand at this point. But, well-loved, very respected band. Even though they're not really the band for me, I would never detract from anything, that they've done or accomplished. Again, pushing the boundaries of death metal, showing that, it doesn't all have to be, just, rotting zombies and, ultra brutal, gory stuff. They really stretched, death metal in neat directions, interesting different forms. So have to mention them. No, it's a little late in the show, but again, maybe sometime we'll do the Opeth episode with some folks that can speak to them in a lot more detail than I can.
Here's something I've noticed about Opeth. Is there are a lot of people who have good taste in metal who like Opeth, but everybody who has bad taste in metal likes Opeth. Like they're one of those bands. Mastodon is the same way. Like they're one of those bands where if someone's like, oh yeah, I'm into music. You meet someone, you're like, start chatting about music. They drop a couple of mediocre band names. If Opeth comes up, I'm like, I know where this is going. Mm-hmm. I think we're going to change the subject.
Yeah. I mean, I've owned a lot of Opeth records. I've spent a lot of time listening to them. And again, it's not that they're bad. I would never say, that they stink or anything, but I've seen them live at least twice, I think, maybe 3 times. But not bad, just not really the band for me at this point. Maybe one day it'll all click and I'll have my come to Ackerfeld moment. We'll see. But all right.
I'm rooting for you not to.
Yeah, I'm okay if it doesn't happen. I'm not going out of my way.
I don't really have any beef with Opeth either. They've never really interested me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I completely get it. I think you and I feel that way about Rush as well, but we're not going to do that because that always riles up the chat way too much.
Speaking of, funny that you picked out first Edge of Sanity and then Opeth. I would argue that Well, obviously, the best Dan Svaney project will forever be Stygg Död, but the second best one would be Pandemonium,
Another one that folks
which
dig a
is
lot.
also tangent on progressive death metal or prog metal. The best progressive death metal band ever for me will be the Pandemonium albums. I like all three of them. I think are bloody brilliant, and I realized I should almost have picked them out for tonight. Do you want me to wrap up, guys?
It's probably time to
Yeah, I think so.
pull the trigger on it.
Yeah, I'm gonna do like a 2-minute quick. I really want to hype the band Crank with Tyrant from ex Niflheim. Last year, an amazing mini with total bloody brilliant heavy metal, which they like to describe themselves as biker rock, but this is like pure the Rods worship with some Iron Maiden thrown in and some new British metal, like killer punchy metal rock from Sweden with Eric / Tyrant from Niflheim. Such a cool album, or mini, full length coming soon. One of the most underrated Swedish death metal albums ever is Utumno, Across the Horizon. The CD was released by total rip-off labels, and no one got hold of it, and it's a super rarity today. Became released a couple of years ago. This is epic Swedish death metal. It is sort of like catchy death metal without being wimpy. Sort of in tradition of early At the Gates, I guess. Not as explicitly progressive or anything, but really epic, superb killer tracks. A great mini of death metal from 92, 93. Utumno, Across the Horizons. And the last quick one, Hiroshima from Stockholm, or actually from Finland. Mostly Finnish guys moved to Stockholm, started the band, released a 7-inch, of course, also a 7-inch in 82 or 83. I think it was called Soldier of the World.
Yep.
And then the full length on a Finnish label, Taste of Death. And this is one of the most underrated Swedish, / Finnish bands, whatever. One of the most underrated ones from Sweden back in the day. Really, I mean, it's stupid simple, but it's really crazy, catchy, cool tracks. Great riffing. The song "Down on My Knees" will forever be one of those, always on my mixtapes when it comes to Swedish metal. Really killer. Needs to mention. But I'm going to finish with talking about something special. So this will wrap it up. And it's a two-parter, because first we're going to talk about something that isn't particularly obscure or anything. It's one of my favorite Swedish 7-inches, who this band came to release, eventually a full-length and an EP. It's a band from Eskilstuna called Crystal Pride.
Should have known.
Yep. This 3-song EP from 82, I would consider to be... this is actually not a big rarity. It is one of those Swedish 7-inches which at least used to be affordable for decades. Nowadays, maybe it's gone up in price, but there's been like quite a decent dead stock of it for decades. So it used to be affordable, at least. Compared to a lot of other stuff, you might still be able to get it. Anyway, this is a female-fronted epic power metal band on this 7-inch. The LP and 12-inch, which came later, are basic, good, totally decent Swedish hard rock metal. The 7-inch is way ahead of its time. On a track like Jeanne d'Arc, it's proto-thrash, basically. It is so chugging and heavy. It's a proto-thrash band from Sweden from 1982. The song Silver Hawk is epic metal. at its absolute best. And it was recorded in May in 1982. But I told you I was going to make it a little bit special. So this was actually not the first Crystal Pride recording, or even, well, release is a bit of a problem, because what is a release? If we're talking about test pressings, or test pressings releases, I don't know. A friend of mine got a test pressing of this single a couple of years ago. And it turns out this is not this single at all. This test pressing was recorded in 1981 in sounds like a different studio, different versions of the two heaviest tracks. There's a date on it which says like 1181 something. So it was either recorded or pressed, probably pressed in November of 81. But it is the two heaviest tracks on the EP. Shandark, the really shugging heavy thrash song, and Silverhawk, the epic power metal track, on a 7-inch pressed in 81. I would argue that this is the first epic power metal vinyl made. And it's the only non-copy.
Jesus.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Consider me punched.
Yep.
Yeah, a friend bought the dead stock from the factory, and he got some really cool stuff like test pressings of Heavy Load or whatever, and then some really weird stuff. And this turned up, wait, there's only 2 songs on it. And then we listened to it, and no, these are different recordings. There's no keyboards. They're not super different, but the guitar sound is a bit more raw on this one. There's no keyboards. I mean, you can totally tell they're not the same recordings. There are small differences. They're probably from different studios. For some reason, they weren't pleased with this. 6 months later, went into a different studio and recorded this instead.
And
yeah, it's one of those one-off things which I got it like 1.5 years ago. No one has ever heard of it, but it's and it is so heavy and before its time. It was already back then, but realizing that no, it's actually from 80. The stuff is from 81. It's a crazy one, and I mean I always loved both. I mean this single has been on top fave for me for decades. So cool to find a different version of it.
That's pretty amazing. Yeah. Very, very cool.
Awesome. That's really fantastic.
Yeah,
indeed. Very neat. All right. Well, Aaron, did you have anything else you wanted to?
We're good.
Show. Okay. I think. Yep. I too.
I mean,
good to call it there. We've done our best to kind of showcase a broad range of stuff from the Swedish heavy metal scene, going back, from the late 70s up to the modern day. We've seen that they cover a lot of different things. Sorry we didn't have time to cover some bands in more depth, but that was not the name of the game tonight. We've done more in-depth dives on some of these bands before. Some of the others, they'll get their turn one day sooner or later. But Dan, Aaron, thank you both very, very much for staying up late and joining in on this. All kinds of good stuff. I think we did the subject absolutely about as much justice as we could. And thanks to everybody for watching. Hope you've enjoyed it. Heard about some new stuff that you can check out. And like we've tried to stress all night, a lot of stuff has gotten reissues in recent years. So this stuff is, more obtainable these days than it has been in a long time. So yeah, no need to fret about spending years looking for old 7 inches if that's not your game. You can absolutely find a lot of this stuff in a much more affordable formats that you want to check out. But yeah, that is going to do it for tonight's edition of Heavy Metallurgy. Next week, Marty should be back, and we'll dial up something else special for you. I don't know what they've got set for the album club next Wednesday night, but check that out also if you've a mind to. Please remember to go check out the Corroseum website. Just when you do so, make sure you have a lot of time to dig into it. It is a fantastic resource on all kinds of obscure metal from throughout the years. Dan has done an amazing job curating all this information for an extremely long time now. And also, of course, check out Aaron's page, the Metal Theologian on YouTube. Folks have been mentioning all night. Aaron's done videos on Swedish metal before and lots of other great topics. He's been at it for an extremely long time, and he always puts out very, very entertaining content. And with that, I think we will move over here to the end of stream button. But hope everybody has.
No, before you turn hit that button,
Oh, please.
where I do most of my Corroseum reading? In line at the post office. I'm not kidding. I get to the post office, there's a line. I like, oh, okay, it looks like I'm gonna fucking find some more shit I'm gonna be spending too much money on. But if there's one place where I'm always looking at the Corroseum, it's in line at the post office.
I'm waiting for the Postmaster General joke to drop here.
No, there is none. There's no connection.
I don't think there is, but I'm still waiting for it to happen. Aaron's sitting there reading on his phone, just nodding his head. I'm the Postmaster General. Dun, 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 dun. That's going to haunt me all weekend. All right. On that note, folks, we must bring it to an end. Everybody take care. Have a great weekend. And again, to Melanie and others who have been affected by hurricanes in Florida this week, we hope that you are staying safe, can return home soon, and that everything will be in really good shape. So everyone take care, and
thanks for
until next week, time to go.